Oh, that's better. All right. Hello. Welcome to my first sort of call-in morning type show. It's got a uh, pretty wide variety of different opinions. Uh, we've got a lively discussion that was going on already before we went live. So I don't want to interrupt the flow of what was going on too much beforehand, but if anyone wants to know who the people are currently speaking, I have the descriptions and links to their content that they make below in the description of my video. So we were just talking about various I think worldviews as well as political ideologies. We were talking about both socialism and anti-natalism are the two things that I think might be points of contention or points of discussion in this conversation. But overall, I think that we were just sort of where I cut things off. We were just broadly discussing political ideology. But just to bring things back to center, where do you guys think that we should be starting this? What foot should we set off in this conversation in terms of the live broadcast part? If anyone has anything to say, I think anti-natalism was I think anti-natalism. As well as socialism, I think we can start with one or the other, but I think that both are somewhat interesting.
I think start with anti-natalism.
Want to start with anti-natalism?
Ooh, all right, we're starting with the difficult stuff first, because socialism, I think there's probably more that people will be agreeing on. But all right, anti-natalism, here we go.
All right. So essentially, I don't really know where to begin because
before we start things off, I just want to say this is something of a reprise of a prior discussion that I've had on my channel. However, the last person who came on to discuss anti-natalism was he had a very specific approach to it, and he had a certain worldview and priorities within that worldview, and he had specific authors and sources that he was not dependent upon, but that he focused quite heavily on. Whereas now I think it might be helpful to get a completely new perspective from anti-natalism. It's something that I find fascinating because to a degree, I consider it to be in some ways the logical conclusion of certain perceptions of a material atheist. Yeah, of a material atheist worldview. I think in a lot of ways anti-natalism is actually kind of sensible in sort of a logical autistic way. I think that what was it? Oh yeah. So this is something continuing of an early discussion, but we're having a completely new approach to it. We actually have Octavian here, who is the guest, and Active Monad, who were guests on the previous anti-natalism debate. But the last person who talked about anti-natalism, his name was Simon Elliott, and he came at it from an angle of pain, of pain and suffering within one's life, and a mitigation and avoiding of pain and suffering using what he called the pinprick principle. And I believe this concept comes from Professor, I forget his first name, but something Simon Benatar. I think it may have, no, not Simon Benatar. Something Benatar. David Benatar. Yes, that's what it was.
Yes, from Benatar.
I'm curious to hear what the justification and the rationale behind your anti-natalism is and how you arrived at these conclusions. And then some of the other guests can say what their opinions are on what you have to say.
So my interest from anti-natalism firstly came off from just studying it as a philosophy, looking into it, reading into its ideology. I never considered myself to be an anti-natalist. I always imagined, well, you should have children because that's what everyone does. It just makes sense. And it seemed like such a obscure and random, weird idea that you shouldn't. But like as I started looking into it more and more, I started realizing, hey, wait, maybe it might be ideal for many people to not have children. And even now, I don't doubt that maybe my views might change in a few more years. But right now, I would consider myself to be strongly anti-natalist. Now, I personally come at this from a different angle from a lot of ways. So someone I believe mentioned earlier, I don't exactly remember what, Active Monad, you mentioned that anti-natalism as a philosophy is only valid if everyone in the world assumes it, or if everyone in the world actually adopts the philosophy. And I happen to disagree, because for me, anti-natalism is about minimizing you should have children, minimizing the possible amount of suffering that a person is likely to go through. Obscure and random, weird idea. And I just generally believe, for example, if I don't have a child, that's one less person to add to overpopulation, one less person who could possibly be a danger to himself or society, or one less person who might end up being born hating his entire life and not wanting to live it, you know? So that's essentially where my worldview comes in. It doesn't come exactly from the perspective that, you know, the world would be better off if we, you know, advocated for the total extinction of humanity. It just comes from the idea, hey, we're probably better off not having children.
Yeah, I guess my point there is, like, how does promoting anti-natalism achieve this? Because I think you have to take the world as it is and like evaluate the best way to minimize suffering if that is your goal in reality. And I don't see anti-natalism appealing to a lot of people, and it seems like the few people you do appeal to probably have like a sense of responsibility, but I think it's get twisted into anti-natalism rather than actually contributing to society in a good way. So I guess I see it as a waste of energy and effort when you could do something else, rather something positive.
So again, you're going with the assumption that it's my idea to kind of proselytize people into anti-natalism. So you're saying kind of that it's a waste of effort to try and get people to believe in this. And I do agree. I do think it's interesting that we're writing academia on it, but I wouldn't necessarily, although I do believe it would be ideal if the entire world relied on anti-natalism, yes, I do believe the amount of resources we would waste on educating everyone to this idea, especially people in starving nations like Africa who are having many, many children. And the reason why they have so many children is because, of course, it's likely that some of the children would die out, and basically just to facilitate their life when they're older.
So do you think you can educate Africans into anti-natalism?
No, I do think it would be better if Africans understood this. If people, I'm speaking kind of bizarrely here, but when I say Africans, I mean people in starving, undeveloped countries who with life. I'm saying, no, we should not waste resources on educating these people. Although, ideally, in an idealistic world, yes, it would be ideal if these people understood the philosophy that the less children they have, the less suffering there would be and the easier society would be to take care of.
Isn't the general consensus, though, that is being that African poverty is exacerbated by the fact that they have too many children, not the fact that they have children at all?
Yeah, too many children. But if they had no children, then again, you would be having, there wouldn't be a problem.
But if you had no children, then you'd have another type of suffering later in life. And the old people would just be alone.
Yeah, sure. But like, how long has, they would be alone, but I think a lot of aid could be sent to them instead of their children.
But how could they, other people send aid if everyone's an old person?
Hey, listen, you're talking about a very specific, now you've gone into the
entire, I didn't want to bring that up, so I thought the Africa.
No, it makes sense, but now we're going through the entire concept. Hey, it's better to have less children. But
well, I think
what I'm basically trying to admit is, yes, unlike the previous person we had, I'm completely different. And I don't necessarily think that in practice, anti-natalism would work because, like you said, sure, it's impossible to convert the entire world to it. But I do believe, for example, take me, or I don't want to speak for other people like you in specific, but take a person, chances are, yes, not having children would put society to better use.
Like, could you really
better use to what end though? Okay. Well, this is a gripe that I have more with material atheism. Sorry to cut you off, Mona, but this is a gripe that I have more so with the sort of material atheist framework. Also, a problem I have to some degree with existentialism and even sort of some of the base premises of nihilism. But it's like I feel like the entire situation is just sort of it's tremendously bleak if you don't have any you find yourself in this situation where it's like the question is, to what end? I suppose, to what end? Because at the end of the day, we're all just going to die from universe heat death if you believe in a purely material conception of reality. So what is really the point of anything? Anti-natalism. Is it just about like pleasure, or maximizing pleasure, or minimizing pain within one's life? What is a good thing for you? That's what I'm curious.
It's about. You're right when you say it is about minimizing pain. Not necessarily maximizing pleasure, because of course, if someone doesn't exist, then you would you wouldn't feel pleasure. So it is negative utilitarianism, which is along the lines of it is better to decrease the amount of suffering someone goes through, rather that it is better to decrease the amount of pain faced in the world than it is to increase the amount of pleasure. So basically, decreasing pain is placed on a higher priority. And well, yeah.
So you would consider yourself a utilitarian in terms of ethics?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can say.
See, that's probably where, at that point, that key point would be the cause for our disagreement. Ultimately, I think we can.
Yeah, and I would say I agree to some extent that minimizing suffering is a good thing, but I still don't see how anti-natalism achieves this, because I don't, like, you say that it's not your goal to like convert everyone to it, but like what are you trying to do? What are you trying to achieve? I think
so when I say I'm an anti-natalist, again, yeah, and my end idea is that not having children is ideal. It's just one of those things that's never going to be implemented in society, that we should never waste resources on. But say tomorrow I had a button and I could press this button to essentially render everyone in the world sterile. Sure, I'd do it.
Okay, but you're not going to have that button.
No, I'm not going to have that button. And that's why I said, and I even said this to Ed, but I said, yeah, this is a lot more of a philosophical one. And it is like, okay, actually planning out an anti-natalist.
I guess it's just like a communist who sort of.
It is. It's like, that's human nature argument. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But we could still always debate the actual principles of communism itself.
Well, any idealistic philosophy would be great if it worked. So I don't see the point in that. It has to be connected to reality. I feel have its foundation in reality to be like of any utility for anyone to promote.
See, this is the fundamental crux of the problem I have with the anti-natalist worldview, but also just sort of various materialist world. I think that there's this treating of life as if it's just sort of like, oh well, I'm just trying to get through to the end of my life, aka the disappearance of my consciousness as it's perceived, and everything along the way is basically just feel good until the end, and have the end be as not terrible as possible. So basically, everything, the minimization of pain, the entirety of one's life just becomes a giant palliative until death. Death is warm embrace, non-existence as is perceived by the anti-natalists. Am I incorrect in saying that? I mean, that's a grim way of portraying it. But every
no, you are pretty much accurate in that portrayal of the worldview. Yeah.
Yeah, and
so non-existence is preferable to existence. Is that the main sort of axiom?
No, it believes. Yeah. I didn't fully understand what you said there, but you said non-existence is better to existence, right?
Yeah, non-existence is preferable to existence.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and can I just comment on what Babs said? Because I've now, when we've been talking about this, I've just been granting the premise that the kind of consciousness is just this byproduct of matter. I don't really, because I don't agree with this premise at all. So I'm just trying to. I don't even see how anti-natalism makes sense within this paradigm, because it doesn't. It won't achieve its ends. But I'm not a materialist, and I do believe like in a spiritual reality, and that this life is like a part of something bigger that we can know everything about. So I just wanted to say
we
that.
could go into a debate about sort of atheism, religion, ethics.
that would be...
I feel like we could divert to that, and that would just be the debate of the centuries, of the millennium, that would never end anywhere. So I think we should just keep it to anti-natalism.
Yeah.
Even though I fully admit that anti-natalism really, when you get down to it, is a debate about ethics and probably religion.
Yeah, there is a lot of...
That's why I wanted to say that I've been...
You're right. You're probably right to bring it to that sort of stage of debate. But I don't know. I think we would just sort of be...
I don't really see us getting very far in this like agreeing anymore. I think we kind of brought up our disagreement. Unless anyone has something to contribute, I don't really have much more to say about it.
Sure, I have a contribution. Just quickly, I'd like to point out that so to me, the way that I see it is a precondition for the way that anti-natalism, at least in the way that most people arrive at it, at least in the materialist sense. I've never heard of I guess there is also non-materialist anti-natalism, like there are certain religious cults and sects that have anti-natal
you have
sort of
the
ascetic quality.
Buddhism.
One could arguably pick up on some. I see what you're saying. I'm not sure if it's quite anti per se, but I see what one would be getting at there.
But, I don't view,
go ahead.
I view religion. I view religions more as, so for example, in the Buddhist belief. Jesus Christ, I can't speak. In the Buddhist belief that life is suffering, I believe religions are, because I'm coming at this from obviously a non-religious perspective, very secular, but I believe that religions are what people make of them. So sure, if people do interpret the
per se, but
teachings
I see what one would be getting at there.
Buddha when he went under the religion. Life is suffering. If that's interpreted, for example, in the Buddhism, you should not have children because life is suffering. Sure, I would consider it to be a Buddhist principle.
Life is suffering. I believe religions are, because I'm coming at this from obviously a non-religious.
In my eyes, it is religious, because I've seen that line quoted many times amongst Buddhist anti-natalism.
Sure, if people do interpret the,
I guess with Buddhism though, I'm not authority on Buddhism at all. But my understanding, it's not a text-based religion. There isn't a holy text. There isn't a strict sort of dogma or doctrine. I could be wrong about that. I'm not that.
Well, you have the Tripitaka, but like Indian religions as a whole, of course, weren't really classified as religions akin to Christianity and Islam and Judaism.
It's more like it's sort of, they classified
it's more of a gradient. Yeah, it's more of a gradient of mythology. And
right. Okay.
So and Buddhism does fall into that, of course, like because if you see like Indian Buddhism, Vietnamese Buddhism, and Japanese Buddhism are very, very differently practiced.
Yeah, I've been
it's the same with ancient paganism, is in the sense that it wasn't an ethically sort of dogmatic. Go on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I just want to say that I think that the thing in Buddhism that everyone in Buddhism shares is the belief that there is no self that exists throughout time. So I think if you look at the Buddhist teachings, it's very clear that the Buddha was not like a materialist, like thing. He thought that was kind of a the wrong idea that you can like do whatever you want in this life and escape the consequences. So I guess it's like this conscious moments of consciousness that are all kind of follow each other and that go into each other and are related to each other in various ways. And you can stop. The goal of Buddhism is kind of a stop one of these chains of kind of moments of consciousness from going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think you can interpret it in the materialist way. And I don't think it's Buddhism anymore anyway. So.
All right. So I guess if those are everyone's comments on anti-natalism.
Well, I'll just make a sort of quick,
go.
Yeah.
There's a quick Christian case. I'm not an authority on when it comes to Christianity. And it's a religion I know the best, but I'm not. There are a lot of other people who know better than me, obviously. But a point I would make is that through Jesus Christ, if you believe in Jesus Christ if Jesus Christ was Lord, life on earth was sanctified by his incarnation in the flesh, and that his suffering actually sanctifies the suffering of mankind in some sense, and that gives it an extra layer of meaning, which means suffering can't be dismissed as something that should be entirely avoided, and made the maxim of any ethical system. That would be the only point I'd make when it comes to anti-natalism from a Christian perspective.
All right. Do any of you have any more comments on anti-natalism before I say my last remark?
No, I'm gonna have to go in a few minutes, so I think I've basically made
cool.
my case clear. So.
All right. Awesome. Hold on one sec. If we could hold on to you for just a little bit longer, we have a few more questions. But I want to quickly go to. I just want to pull something up for everyone, which is my thoughts on anti-natalism are this: in terms of at least anti-natalism in terms of being made from the material kind of care harm argument. My thoughts on anti-natalism are, first of all, you basically, for at least for this flavor of anti-natalism, you need to accept kind of the materialist or material atheist or type conception of reality. And second of all, you need to, so if anyone's familiar with Jonathan Haidt's axes of morality or his sort of moral axis method that he talks about in The Righteous Mind, it's a good book. I recommend everyone reads it. It's a bit basic bitch, but I still recommend it. He's quite a good writer. But basically, if everyone looks on the screen, there's this blue line, and the left are people on the quote unquote left of the screen are people who identify as quote unquote left wing in America, in the context of America. So this obviously means certain things. And then on the right are people who identify as quote unquote right wing. You'll notice that in the quote unquote far right portions of the population, that blue line, which is about care and harm, actually dips below some of the other value indicators. Purity or sanctity actually goes above the care harm line, as does fairness. So harm is a lot of value placed on it, and I think this can actually be seen reflected in ideologies like, let's say, futurism. I think that there's an aspect of, and in general, just sort of like a conception of the approach of like war and struggle from historically, from like, I guess, sort of a more reactionary or traditionalist perspective, or just in general sort of a more quote right perspective as opposed to other perspectives. And so that's just an interesting observation. So I think that it basically depends, even if you are a materialist, I think it literally just depends on what your quote values are in this sort of Haidt values axis way, in the sense that if you don't value this one axis, which in all fairness, most people do place most value on, but if you don't value it, then anti-natalism probably won't be your cup of tea, at least from this method. But I think that at the same time, it is kind of like the logical conclusion, as it were, of basically a lot of materialist atheism. Not necessarily nihilism, material theism, certainly. So before you leave, Rick, I want to quickly get your thoughts on socialism, because I know that I'm probably not the only one in this call who's skeptical of capitalism, but I'm also skeptical of communism and Marxism in a lot of ways as well, and sort of Stirnerism and all those sorts of ideologies, because I'm in a difficult place where I look at, I mean, Stirnerism isn't really an economic ideology, but the thing is, it's similar to a lot of the left-wing economic ideologies, in the sense that it dismisses things like tradition and nation, ancestry, etc., as a mere spook. So in that sense, it is similar. So I look at things like this, and I say, basically, I'm in a difficult position. Economics, I guess, really aren't my priority, but I'm curious to hear what everyone else's take is. Let's start with you, Ritik.
So yeah, I would definitely place myself in the bottom left category, listening to it, following more along the lines of Chomsky. Noam Chomsky likes socialism.
Interesting. Okay, my parents are big fans of Noam Chomsky. I grew up with a lot of Noam Chomsky. Yeah. So Chomsky, I blame America socialism. I mean, there are worse things. I mean, he actually makes a lot of valid points that I, as sort of a further right, significantly further right person than him, agree with, just in terms of the current order of things. But I think he gets the some things about like the why wrong, but I think he gets like some aspects of the how and what right, as it were. But, but you would say, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I say I see where you're coming from when you say that, because sure, he has more of an analytical view on the world than he does a theoretical one.
Someone in the chat is challenging you, saying anti-natalism needs to be stamped out. It's based on bogus notions of overpopulation, man-made global warming, plus obviously ethno-masochism, hedonistic individualism, the naive expectation of perpetual technical progress, sort of ... all these sort of Whiggish things he's listing off. But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there. If you'd like to respond to that, you can. But otherwise, I'm just curious. Do you think when you advocate socialism, you say, what are you talking about? I see, because when people say socialism in different contexts,
socialism through democratically elected means.
So do you advocate like cooperatives and workers owning the means of production?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so what's the difference between that and a communist? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'd say socialism and communism go under very different principles. So I think a lot of people look more at socialism and communism as more, I mean, communism to me has more been, because of course there's multiple definitions, so I'll just say what I go with. I'd say communism is more to do with income inequality and the fixing of that. Meanwhile, socialism is more to do with the relationship between the employer and the employee. And it's aimed towards fixing things such as wage slavery and minimum wage. I do believe in a minimum wage. I really want to respond to this comment though, with the man-made, based on bogus notions of overpopulation.
Yep,
Sorry?
Oh, I just said be my guest. Please respond to it.
Oh, yeah.
Invite her.
Man-made global warming, ethno-masochism, Jesus Christ, hedonistic individualism. You have a point there with the hedonism, and the naive expectation of perpetual technical progress, a major tool of the neo-Marxist dynamic. Okay, so as for the man-made global warming, I mean, the evidence is there. Global warming is thanks to people. I'm sorry, but like, there isn't much more to say about that. I've seen
virtually warming is good.
Sure, if you want to talk about the melting of ice caps and possibly the restructuring of the entire Earth, we're going to have people moving from hot countries into newly habitable lands such as Russia. But
good, all the weak will die off.
Sure, if that's your end goal. But as for the man-made global warming, I don't have much to say. But as for the hedonistic individualism, unfortunately, you are entirely right when you say that. And that comes down to, again, another philosophical debate, which I don't have much energy for. and the naive expectation of perpetual technical progress. I'm kind of interested on that. Can you kind of elaborate?
Are we gonna have a debate with the guy in the chat now?
No. I don't have much to debate him about. I'm just kind of curious.
We could just pick up on his points and maybe discuss them.
I'm just curious what he means about the naive expectation of perpetual technical progress in terms of...
Maybe he's making a sort of Kaczynskiite sort of point where...
I thought it was sort of a Whiggish sort of critical of the Whig stance.
Oh, the idea
go ahead.
The idea that with technological progress, social progress, whatever that means, will accompany it. Which I'm not sure
progress in quality of life, or like sort of HDI type stuff will also get better.
I think the original Whigs would have maybe, I don't know, the old Whigs might not have said that, but the later Whigs might have said something about science being the improver of mankind and something like that.
Well, I'm curious to hear your Kaczynskiite interpretation.
Well, the Kaczynskiite interpretation would be that technology is essentially tyranny, and that the progress of technology contradicts any notions of liberty or freedom, dignity, basically human happiness in the ultimate sense, and that the encroachment of technology overrides all political concerns of a society. And that's why Kaczynski bombed people, because he thought it was pretty bad. But I'm not an authority on Kaczynski, but that's just my general impression. I'm not sure if the guy in the chat is a Kaczynski follower.
No, but it's an interesting interpretation. And yeah, I haven't seen much. Someone sent me his manifesto, and I ended up reading a few pages of it. And I was like, seems fairly sensible.
It
seems like it's sort of disaffected, disaffected Luddism. And then I realized who it was from, and I was like, what are you doing? Are you like Fed posting? Like, why are you sending me this manifesto? So some random Anon adds me on Discord and starts sending me the Kaczynski manifesto. They were like, do you like it? Like, I didn't realize what it was. And I said, yes. After I read the first few pages. It's like Fed posting.
Yeah.
So, let's see. Unless anyone has any last comments to make. Okay, here, hold on. There's a response. Ritik, there's a response for you on anti-natalism. Can you see the comment chat?
Yep. I'm reading.
Yeah, check it out. Le Plurome has responded.
So what's happening?
Ritik is deeply engrossed in the reading of a comment of my YouTube video, I assume. Is that what's going on?
I'll just say this when it comes to socialism. If I were an early 19th century person, like living in the early 19th century Britain or Australia, I probably would have voted for the Labour Party. That's probably my position on socialism. I don't think it's I don't hold to it as a dogmatic ideology, but I think the idea of a sort of a muscular state with respect to trade and industry isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, Ritik dropped out, but yeah,
And it depends on the circumstances of the country. I mean,
in the social democracy in Sweden, before they, like in the 70s, when they kind of decided to go multicultural and multiracial in the end, it worked pretty well, I think. But I guess since it made people dependent on the state, it made us vulnerable later to the state deciding to go in the multicultural direction. So that's the problem with it, I guess.
Yeah, Ritik is back and ready to respond to Le Pleuron and Brother Inabiline.
I lost the message, though. Let it load again. I have to get this internet problem fixed. It's... A third worldization of the first world is most likely unless major demographic and other trends are reversed. When you say we're wasting ever greater shares of our wealth in non-productive or creative activity, I do agree overwhelmingly with you there. And yeah, I do think, yes, humanity has hit a... I don't know what the word is.
An impasse?
Definitely some kind of plateau when it comes. So I that would be my view. Yes, humanity is sort of, at least now, hitting a plateau, and we have this illusion. We do have this
technology-wise. Do you think we won't exponentially increase like is?
Yeah, they say will exponentially increase. I don't necessarily know if I don't think we'll exponentially increase. I think that a plateau would be likely, but it could just be linear from here. But there's definitely I do believe we definitely have a lot of misconceptions about the future. For example, people believe that artificial intelligence is far more capable than it actually is, and people are fearing things such as, a takeover, a world takeover, AI seizing control of the world, etc. And I don't necessarily think that those are valid concerns, especially not for the next 100 years or so.
All right. Perhaps, yeah. I mean, I'm ambivalent. I'm open-minded either way. Yeah. All right, fair enough. So I think that's fair, pretty much it, unless someone brings something up in the chat for anti-natalism. But let's see, we were talking about workers, socialism. Does your socialism come from a similar place as your anti-natalism? Would you say? This is a psychological question. I'm putting you on the spot.
Socialism comes from the same place as anti-natalism.
If you could psychologize, or like even pathologize, but really just sort of psychologize yourself and why you believe what you believe, go ahead. I'm curious if you could do that yourself, because I think the mark of a self-aware person is being able to do that. I do that all the time. Yeah.
I understand why you asked that, and you may or may not be surprised to know the answer is yeah. I do think that both of them do come from the same place. What place that is, it's probably along the lines of my desire to probably wish the best for everyone, even if that's by non-conventional means,
I think that, as well as a material conception of the world, is also crucial in both of these. In a way, or at least I find that people who place value on economic ideologies tend to have a more material conception of the world. At least
I do place a lot of I do place a lot of weight on, yes, economic ideology, and yes, I do have a very material view of the world. I don't necessarily as for an economic and a material link, I'm curious why you believe those two things are correlated, though. I mean, they are individually true for me, but I'm curious where you see the connection, because as far as I'm concerned, those two things are just two unrelated aspects. Oh.
I think they can be unrelated in the sense that some people who emphasize economics can have an ideological cause for that, in the sense that they are well, communists, or maybe just capitalism is their ideology, whatever that means. I can't think of one on the top of my head an ideology that is entirely economic, but they might in another way still believe in the spiritual realm, or might believe in a religion. So I can see why you dispute the link between economics and materialism. But if
I don't dispute it, because this is more of a
causal link, it's a correlation link.
Exactly. That's
saying,
what I mean.
yeah.
Okay. Right.
I know.
It's
I
like the
understand
people who
that
are
too.
communists and capitalists, they literally, like the people who, I'm not talking about even people who subscribe to communism or capitalism, who think this economic system works because I think it factually works and I just want a system that works. Not for whatever reason. Not people like that. I'm talking about people who specifically who infuse economic ideology with who infuse economic ideology with political ideology or worldview, or sort of a prescriptive sense of how the world should be, in the sense that a lot of capitalists and communists and socialists and anarchists of various stripes I find tend to do this. And so
Again,
I think that this is a trait of generally of a materialist worldview, which I have to some degree, but not to this degree.
Yeah, no, and I get it is from that, but again, it also depends on your end means. For example, I know like there's this the Ayn Rand type of libertarianism. That's something I find especially, that I disbelieve especially in, because it always follows this type of ideology that the person who is capable of creating the most money is the most deserving of that money, and is essentially the victor or the fittest in this game of survival of the fittest that they've artificially created. Their idea isn't about like the libertarian idea isn't necessarily about, in my eyes, helping the poor. It's about not caring about the poor. This idea
by libertarianism. If you think libertarianism is, if you mean it,
I'm talking about capitalism, like right-wing libertarianism, like American libertarianism.
Wait, so would you just narrow that down to sort of like free market?
Free market
session.
Capitalism, laissez-faire, the Gary Johnson type.
Okay.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. That's not really like, that's more the people who they literally hold the idea, if you are poor, you're not worth my time. And if someone has gained money, no matter how they gained that money, whether it was through cheating, whether it was through very violent or criminal means, they're the most deserving of that money. And yeah, that is the Ayn Rand philosophy too, the objectivism.
It's almost a sort of Nietzschean idea in a sort of way. Like
well, sure. You know how many people misinterpret him, though, right? Like,
I'm not misinterpreting. I'm not talking about Nietzsche as in Nietzsche's thought himself, but a sort of Nietzscheanism in the sense that the way people interpret him, like that sounds like a Nietzsche.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah, and along those lines of thought, it's like even now the worst interpretations we're seeing nowadays with people completely misunderstanding his philosophy, where they believe it to be about nihilism rather than the prediction and then the eventual conquering of nihilism.
Yeah.
There's some interesting. Sorry, no, go ahead.
No, go on.
Well, Nietzsche's interesting, and I do want to explore that, but I just want to quickly mention someone that I was talking about when I said that Marxism, or at least sort of Marxism, the full package, is almost a wholly kind of material, something that stems from an almost wholly material conception of the world, at least in that realm. And brother Inabeline said, Marxism is entirely economic. It stratifies the very nature of suffering as material and fungible. And this is basically a much more eloquent summarization of my views, my interpretations of that worldview. But I feel a similar way about, let's say, objectivism, which you were just discussing vis-a-vis Ayn Rand. And brother Nabeline in the chat also says, I never went from a libertarian to a reactionary like most of my friends. And that's something I have in common as well. I used to be a socialist, but Rand said some very interesting things in retrospect. And I actually have a similar trajectory. I used to be kind of a Marxist. socialist. And she was definitely more mystical and perennial in her ideology, as spiky as she seemed, which is interesting. I've never heard that said about Rand, although she does come off as kind of a bit interesting. She had almost like a cult-like following. I think that she certainly has like this depth to her personality. And I know, and there are a lot of very interesting anecdotes about her life. And I know that a lot of effort into her stories, and they are they have a cult following, and they have to be appreciated in some aspects as objectively good, even if you think the writing is dry and dull and the story is unengaging. There are certain things about her work that you have to give praise to. And hold on, Rand once said something like, "Nothing in art is destroyed, only displaced," and that explains her economics as well, he says, and that's interesting. I think that's very interesting. Someone says Rand was a total psychopath, and then someone said maybe the same could be said for Evola. Evola and Rand. That's interesting. Yeah. But someone said Rand is no better than Marx, and yeah, I mean, no better or no worse. I just think that they both have their ideology stems from this kind of, the way I see it, from this kind of material concept. What do you now more see what I'm saying, Ritik? In terms of material. Yeah,
that makes sense.
What do you do you think that I see, the thing is with capitalism and communism, I still feel like capitalism in some ways is a bit more of an ideology, although communism has become an idea. You know what I mean? I feel like communism is a bit more basic than capitalism. It's a bit more of like almost a system, almost like a rudimentary equation.
Yeah. No, another misconception
really,
about capitalism is
it's kind of a lens, if anything. It's like sort of a sociological lens.
Yeah, it's also had a there's this dumb belief. It's obviously not a belief that I'm sure you would hold, but I see it a lot amongst capitalists themselves, that capitalism is purely human nature, or maybe they're conflating capitalism with general human behavior. But capitalism isn't really about the actual production itself.
These people, they're like the sort of free market Darwinists, as it were.
Exactly. I was talking to this girl a while ago, and like the communism did get brought up because I was talking about how I met one of my friends, and I'm like, well, I was a socialist, and I was just trying to, look at what communism was all about, and then I met this communist guy, and essentially it got to the point where she started talking about communism, and then she said some things about capitalism, which made me ask, wait, so serious question, how long do you think capitalism's been around? And she's like, when hasn't it been around? I'm like, hey, don't ask me. I could give you a date where capitalism hasn't been around. It's not been this, man, what's the word? It's not been this omnipresent, system through the entirety of mankind. It's a very recent system. And of course, there were many things preceding it: feudalism, anarchy in some cases, etc. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think
it is, at the end of the day, just another human created system. I just wanted to bring that up because
okay. I think yeah.
Hello?
It has aspects to it that
you just cut out for a second.
Okay.
You did. Yeah. I thought I cut out. I was terrified. But yeah, please say that again.
Capitalism, it kind of has aspects to it that are kind of emergent from human natural behavior, but I don't think you can say that the system that we have today around the world that we call capitalism is like, it's very much like dependent on how we regulate it and stuff like that. And I think you have to, every time you discuss it with a new person, you kind of have to define what you're talking about, because and especially people like libertarians and socialists, for example, have kind of opposites idea, like a very different idea of what is the definition of capitalism. So you kind of have to kind of define it every time you.
Well, I guess the difference is that if you go to feudal Europe, and ask them, are you a feudalist? They would have no idea what the hell you're talking about. If you go to 17th century England, 18th century England, 19th century England, 20th century England, 21st century England, 22nd century England, 23rd century England, 24th century England, 25th century England, 26th century England, 27th century England, 28th century England, 29th century England, 30th century England, 31st century England, 32nd century England, 33rd century England, 34th century England, 35th century England, 36th century England, 37th century England, 38th century England, 39th century England, 40th century England, 41st century England, 42nd century England, 43rd century England, 44th century England, 45th century England, 46th century England, 47th century England, 48th century England, 49th century England, 50th centu and ask, "Are you a capitalist?" They would not know what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you go to 20th century Soviet Union and ask them, "Are you a communist?" They wouldn't know what you're talking about, and they'd probably say yes. So that's the difference I would make between those three sort of systems. Is that Marxianism, or sort of a watered down Marxism, maybe, or socialism and Marxism are different, but I won't get into that. That they are ideologically based economic positions, whereas I don't think capitalism and feudalism are really that. I think particularly capitalism has become reified by the existence of communism. It's become an ideology because of the existence of communism and opposition. Well, not just communism, but opposition to capitalism in general.
Sure, and it's more, but that's more to do with the entire organized. Because right now I wouldn't say that there's been a single economic system, because the socialism I'm talking about is quite different. It is along the Bernie Sanders, Noam Chomsky line, and obviously don't emphasize. And I never defend the Soviet Union. If you ask me, that was mainly just more or less, yeah, state capitalism down the barrel of a gun, authoritarianism. Shared very many similarities with fascism in some ways. It did operate around those. So I would definitely say, yeah, those were authoritarian states, and of course, a lot of capitalist states nowadays aren't authoritarian.
Okay, well, I'm not really saying whether.
No, I get what you mean, but yeah, I'm just saying, yeah, as with communism, you say, as you said, the implementation of it was very forced and through revolution rather than democratic means, which is why there was such a strong dogma about it.
All right. Yeah, I mean, the Marxist historians would say that that capitalism was brought to England via the Civil War, or what they would call the English Revolution. They sort of project back 20th century historiography onto 17th century historiography, and they'd say the same thing about the American Revolution. Some would even go back to, I don't know, the rise of Augustus, and say that was sort of a move away from a sort of anarchic economic system. I don't know. But yeah, I guess it has to do with how you interpret history. Anyway.
Yep, I gotta go now. So it's been great being on. See ya.
Yeah, good to talk to you.
Yeah. See ya, Ed.
Awesome. Thank you for gracing us with your presence, you commie anti-natalist scum. Thanks for having you on. Pleasure as always. And if anyone's interested in what this gentleman has to say, they can go check out his channel in the links below. And he also has a Discord that he is pleadingly desperate to have everyone to go on to. So check out his Discord.
Hey, my old Discord server had several hundred people at one point. This one has 20. So
yeah.
All right.
Listen, he wants to restore his former glory. Okay, if you want to restore Ritik's former glory of his Discord, which you were probably never a part of, be one of his legionnaires.
Right,
yeah, please help him. Be one of his legionnaires. Yeah. All right. Thank you for joining us again. So, where were we? We were talking about economics and some stuff sort of like that. If either of you want to go ahead, then by all means.
Yeah, I don't know. I've become less of a sort of. I think it's because I've become more sympathetic to classical liberalism because I've probably become more Protestant in a sense.
Oh, dude, you're a liberalist now.
No, I'm not a liberalist.
You're a liberalist. Liberalist scum. It's like first we got an anti-natalist, now we have a liberalist. Meme ideology.
I'm not a fucking liberalist.
No, I'm actually curious. Okay, so this is something I have not heard very much in the circles that I roam in. You said first of all, you're becoming more Protestant, which is unusual.
Well, I never was particularly Catholic or
Well, not becoming, but you're becoming who you are. You're increasing in your Protestantism.
Becoming my art, like in the Richard Spencer sense.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
But most people tend to end up as Orthodox or traditionalist Catholics, and then on top of that, they tend to be very more and more hostile to Enlightenment values. I found myself becoming more and more hostile to Enlightenment values. But what do you call it? But well, that's its own story. But I find that I also find myself becoming more religious, and those two things go hand in hand with me. But for you, it's the opposite. But of course, there's a difference there because I'm Jewish.
I probably separate the Enlightenment from a sort of a classical liberal tradition, in the sense that the Enlightenment, I guess you go back to John Locke and say, yeah, he was part of the Enlightenment, and that his conception of liberalism was made liberalism part of the Enlightenment. I'd argue that in actuality, they're sort of separate things. But I'd also argue the Enlightenment as a whole has been understood wrong. I feel like a lot of reactionary people sort of take the Enlightenment historiography at face value. They take in actuality what the Enlightenment sort of supporters themselves understood about the Enlightenment, and sort of just roll with that. That's the history of the Enlightenment. It's what the Enlightenment people, they themselves, claim to have been, which I think is a mistake. I think to understand the Enlightenment as a sort of solid,
it's the storybook version of the Enlightenment is sort of how people take it. It's it's like what Sargon said in his talk with Richard Spencer. He was like, the state as conceived of by law. It's like they believe things like that, like literally that like these modern concepts were invented by these Enlightenment thinkers, when in reality it's a more nuanced and complex process than that. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, it's just like the Locke as an Enlightenment thinker was not the same as someone like David Hume in the late 18th century. And David Hume was not very similar to Rousseau or other sort of French philosophers like Diderot, Condillac, other sort of empiricist types. The people who compiled the first encyclopedia in France, they were all very different. And to call the way that Enlightenment historiography works is that it was a move away from religion and autocracy and towards liberty, equality. Well, equality's, that's sort of more of a later Enlightenment thing, but more towards liberty, irreligion, secularism, but in many senses, irreligion as well. And the move away from feudalism.
Yes, we can hear you.
I think that's an inaccurate understanding of.
Sorry, go ahead.
Period.
Octavian, sorry, you just cut out because Monad was talking.
Right.
You said you were talking about how equality was a value of the latter days of the Enlightenment, and then some other stuff.
I'm not gonna. I don't think I'll make that claim. I think I'm probably not confident enough to make that claim. But I'd argue that, in some sense, the Enlightenment is more interested in liberty than in equality. But that sort of changes from the American Revolution through to the French Revolution. But the Enlightenment as a whole, I don't think you can characterize it as one sort of push, like a great movement towards away from religion and away from sort of authoritarianism. I think that's a simplistic perspective that there are a lot of traditionalists and reactionaries sort of hold to.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's many traditionalists in the alt-right that see the Enlightenment as where everything went wrong, basically. And I appreciate much of the Enlightenment ideals and stuff. It's just that it was some things was taken too far, and there I think that the JQ becomes a relevant issue actually, because they kind of push the whole kind of ideological development in a certain direction. I don't know if you agree with me, but
yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I'm definitely not at the point where I'd support the Enlightenment as an idea, and the idea that move away from
I think that the
religion
JQ becomes a
particularly.
relevant issue actually, because they kind of push the whole.
I'm not that type of liberal. Well, not really liberal. I mean, I know. I'm sort of moving. I'm fluid at the moment when it comes to my beliefs.
I don't know if you agree with me, but
yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I'm
you're getting some pretty hard.
At the point.
Sorry, no, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm getting attacked. Oh, I'm being attacked for mentioning Diderot. Yeah, sorry, quit. I'm not like I'm not supporting. I'm just mentioning that Diderot was quite different to Locke, and quite different to Hume, quite different to Rousseau. There wasn't sort of a solid. I'm not really liberal. Oh, you believe in Enlightenment? Oh,
tacit endorsement.
Oh, I mentioned someone. It's like when what's his name?
You're getting some pretty hard.
Who was the?
Sorry,
I
no.
forgot his name. He's like gone. He's gone off the radar. The guy, the leader of Trump's campaign. I'm not like Bannon. That's right, Bannon. It's like when Bannon mentioned and quite Evola, and everyone's like, oh, it wasn't.
Yeah, they thought he was endorsing Evola, even though he was arguing against it. Endorsement.
Oh, I mentioned someone. It's like when. But anyway, I think if you look at the way.
Sorry, no.
I forgot his name. He's like gone. He's gone off the radar. The guy. I forgot what our original point was. Leader of Trump's campaign. I'm not like. Sorry. Bannon. That's right. Bannon. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's right. Liberalism and Protestantism. I guess. And everyone's like, oh, it wasn't. When I consider what Protestantism is, oh, I mentioned primarily it's a rejection. But anyway, I think, and it's rejection of at. The way clerical authority, some would say absolute clerical authority. I forgot what I original clerical authority is as a whole, but I think. Oh, sorry, yeah, liberalism and Protestantism is inherently anti-authoritarian. When I not consider what Protestantism, and in that sense, when traditionalists say primarily it's Protestantism leads to liberalism, they are sort of correct. Clerical they're correct to me. Some would say absolute clerical authority. I forgot what I originally. But to say, and they'd also be correct in saying that Protestantism can lead to a sort of Protestantism is inherently sort of atheism, an Enlightenment atheism. But I will add that a lot of traditionalists say Enlightenment atheism did come out of Catholic Europe, so it's not as simple as that. But I think it comes down to freedom of conscience. And they could also, Martin Luther, in particular, can emphasize freedom of conscience, and that was sort of atheism at the core of, I think, his rebellion against the church. The idea that traditionalists you can't lie about what you believe. Really, you have not. Yeah, at the end of the day, you have to stand where at your individual conscience what you believe. But I think that's probably where the liberalism of the modern era comes from, in the sense that you and individualism. You know, when he said, I stand alone, I can do no other. He was sort of stressing a point. You can't lie of individualism that we inherit as liberalism today. I think you can trace it back to that. But others would say you can go back to the Renaissance, you can go back to the modern era, comes from classical Rome or Greece, and individuals. But yeah, then you'd be sort of going into Enlightenment historiography and sort of the Enlightenment. He would sort of stress. Enlightenment thinkers would argue that Middle Ages individual decline away from what the antiquity was, and that the antiquity was sort of the pre-Enlightenment, which I think is a ridiculous position. But I'm sort of rambling on now, so someone else can check. come from classical sense that you Rome or Greece.
Well, there are several points that I'm not that familiar with Enlightenment or European history in general, especially during this period, especially except in like sort of broad abstract. But
away from.
Well, first of all, yes, we are. By the way, I'd just like to quickly thank Sargon's Black Grandfather for subscribing to my channel. Thank you for the subscription, Sargon's Black Grandfather. Always appreciate it. There are several points that I'm not that familiar with Enlightenment. You said that free conscience. This is interesting because they briefly. I'm very unfamiliar with Christianity, especially Protestantism, from a theological perspective, but I am quite familiar with it from a sort of sociological perspective. I've read a fair amount of Weber, and he talks a lot about Protestantism in my channel. The theme of conscience comes up occasionally in his work. I'm curious to hear more about your sort of theory on this. It's interesting. Let's see. You said that
the idea that
this is interesting because they briefly. I'm very.
I mean, the idea of sola scriptura,
especially Protestantism,
and the idea that you have a personal relationship.
But I am quite familiar
Bible
with it from a
is
sort of sociological
God's revelation.
I've read a fair amount of Weber, and he talks a lot about Protestantism in my channel.
Yeah, that is sort of
comes up occasionally.
an individualism.
To hear more about your sort of
which
theory on
lends itself
interesting
to liberalism quite well. I mean, I'm not going to say that Britain's conversion to Protestantism in the 16th, 17th century was the cause and the only cause for its turn towards a sort of more liberal constitutional settlement in the 17th century. There are various reasons for that. But there's definitely a correlation there, and there's definitely a reason why in countries like America, libertarian, classical liberal ideas emerged because of it being a very radically Protestant country. And America being a Protestant country was it would, I don't think, if America had been colonized by a Catholic England, I would have been a very different development in the North American colonies. I don't think you would have had a revolution in the same way that a Catholic North America would have existed. I think you could very well be in a position where North America would have been similar to say Argentina or Brazil or Colombia, in the sense you have a mixed population of American Indians and English people. It wouldn't have been a sort of a settler colonial nation in the same way that it is now. But that's the reason why I think the decline of Protestantism in America is probably linked with the decline of a belief in sort of libertarian ideas. I think libertarian ideas in America, I think most libertarians in America would consider themselves Protestant. If they're Christian, they would consider themselves Protestants. The Catholics, it's sort of more, well, they could be sort of paleocons, or they just are just straight up liberals, and they're sort of out of ethnic sort of solidarity. But yeah, I'm sort of rambling now. I always do that.
No, actually, this is quite interesting. I just want to quickly read some of the comments that we're getting in the chat. Hold on. Let's see. Quid S Veritas says on Ayn Rand's writings, they are torturously, appallingly written. Says, let's see. Hold on. He said something about the Enlightenment. Where is it? I didn't see it. He had a longer comment about the Enlightenment. Didn't see that I'm not seeing right now, so never mind. But let's see. Monad, do you have any comments?
Well, Yeah, I'm just I think like the ideals of it's so hard to like imagine a world where like enlightenment hadn't taken place. So it's kind of I have a hard time like taking people seriously that kind of want to go back to some kind of go to some world where that hasn't happened. Like if it is possible, like it would be possible now. I don't know. Like we're so. I think we have to like work with what we've got and kind of take away the worst developments and lay the foundation for like next generation to like go further. I don't think we can really imagine even what. I don't know what society I envision for the future. I know that like the development the last like 100 years has been terrible. And yeah, I don't think you can just say that, oh, it's with the Enlightenment, that's where everything went wrong. Yeah.
Interesting. So yeah. So here the show is more pro-enlightenment than usual. What can I say? Yeah, we could get Cater on here and we could get.
Well, I don't know if I'm.
I know that I'm not saying pro-enlightenment. Yeah. I'm joking. I know that both of you are probably overall far more skeptical of the Enlightenment than the average modern person. I was just saying by the standards of the people. Brother Nebeline had a comment about this as well, saying, let's see. Marx and Pennicook thought that capitalism belonged to the same historical trend of feudalism, if I recall correctly, which is interesting. Yeah, that is actually perhaps. Yeah, I think I would beg to differ in certain ways because I think that capitalism in the same way that nationalism or third positionism does in a lot of ways, or I mean capitalism, I mean feudalism, or sort of similar contemporary ideologies to feudalism, perhaps similar contemporary things that existed within like Asia, Africa, and the Islamic world as well. You would have these traditional systems that, like nationalism or third positionism, although they may be focused around a non-economic factor, one of these sort of spoofs of national caste, culture, or religion, these things often animate the society to act in a way that defies the capitalist system. Or one could even say perhaps like it unifies the classes towards a common end. It kind of ends class warfare, or it kind of breaks the kind of class dynamics that Marxism and that communism / Marxism seeks to end, but plays the game of, and that capitalism sees a conflict between, and that capitalism sort of has inherent to its nature. What, at least from a Marxist analysis, what do you think?
Well, I think, like as I said earlier, it's very hard to know exactly what people talk about when they say capitalism. But yeah, I probably agree that the system that developed after feudalism was quite different, and I think that the Marxist analysis is kind of simplistic, and I guess this is a thing that is a problem with Marxism, but also in general with materialism, and that I think is a problem with our society right now is that we have no like telos, no, we don't know where we're going, like why society exists at all. When like we're it's just like GDP that matters, yeah, we have to like have never stopped and like thought about, oh, we threw out Christianity, what's society for, like nowadays, like what do we want to achieve? And I feel that we haven't answered that question at all. Like it's so it's hard to like, I think it's hard to lay the foundation for something new without answering that question to some extent.
I so, yeah, yeah. Mm, I'm ambi- I'm I, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Still thinking. Hold on. I'm see. It's kind of ambivalent. I don't want to. I'm not one to speak when I don't fully have my mind made up on something. But at least in terms of the way I'm thinking, I kind of defer to others. But Brother Enebeline says in the chat, Spengler felt class conflict was important too, just that racial conflict took primacy, or at least from how I read Spengler, sort of a civilizational conflict is how he describes it in like Decline of the Occident, which is something that I read that was like a huge, coming from sort of for when I was way younger, like maybe 14, 15, or even younger than that.
Well,
Like
that's the thing.
from sort of a Marxist perspective, it really influenced the way I thought about the world when I read about these sort of, because like someone like Stirner would dismiss like, you know, the entirety of Decline of the Occident, the sort of intra-civilizational conflict narrative, or even the sort of narratives of grouping by civilization with these sort of spiritual energies. He would dismiss that all as like spookdom. But I think that there is something very real to it, you know, at least in terms of, even from a pragmatic functional angle, just in terms of how it affects the way that people act, and it can quote unquote break this sort of class paradigm. Sorry. Hello?
There you go. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think when it comes to conflict being sort of ideological sort of axiom, as in, you know, class conflict, racial conflict, I think you have to really take it back to individual conflict between human beings, in the sense that, I mean, you could sort of take the whole state of nature thing where people were in a state of nature, whatever that means, and they devised the state, or they devised society in order to preserve their safety and get rid of conflict. And they surrendered their individual sovereignty to something higher than them so that they could preserve their own safety. But you could also take the religious perspective when it comes to that, and talk about how when you know, the first man struck another man, you know, Cain and Abel, that was sort of the beginning of warfare, and that I sort of don't know where I'm going with this, but I was just going to say that warfare as a whole is the product of a fallen earth, and every the class conflict, all conflict really can be traced back to the fallen nature of man. And if you're gonna go on about sort of class conflict, race conflict, you're sort of missing. I feel like you're missing a core sort of understanding of human nature, in the sense that humans are, by their own nature, violent and pretty shitty in most ways. So I think the Marxist emphasis on class conflict really is ultimately a denial of human nature, and it's a reducing of humanity to a sort of economic determinist unit, which has
it's sort of a reduction of motivation, to the extent that it's almost exactly what the like economic school kind of capitalists do, except unlike what the capitalist models do, the communist one is actually halfway decent at predicting things that happen in reality. But I think that their model is also particularly relevant in the modern sort of globalist day and age, especially in certain parts of the world. I don't think, however, that it's necessarily overall an applicable model, just because it's a better heuristic than, let's say, the capitalist sort of worldview, both prescriptive and descriptive of how things should go and are going and will go hypothetically, sort of using their model. You see what I mean?
Yeah,
I think
yeah, I
that
see.
they're both over. You're totally right in that they're both overly reductionist. Yeah. Like fundamentally, I think
I
that,
appreciate
go
the
ahead.
Spenglerian perspective. I'm not an expert on Spengler, but I do sympathize with this sort of cyclical understanding of civilization. But again, that not in sync with the Christian understanding of history, which is more linear than that. It's not necessarily cyclical. I'm not sure how you reconcile that, but that's just a point I'd make.
Yeah, I think that in general, sort of Abrahamic religions have kind of linear narratives to them, I guess. But I think they also have elements that you could draw upon and point to. Oh, this is sort of a cyclical thing or a cyclical belief, more so than let's say something that I view as like an absolutist kind of linear thing. Like, for instance, the Whiggish conceptions of history, which, although they're not religions per se, they're effectively religions in the sense that ideologies like that are basically religions or sort of religion replacers.
Yeah, but the Whig, I mean, yeah, the Whig history is interesting. It's usually used as a meme by reactionary and trad types, and they sort of refer to everything as every sort of historical point they don't like as Whig history. That could be right. I think Whig history is sort of a point, but I don't think you can understand English history without understanding Whig history. I think Whig history is sort of very Anglo-centered perspective.
We have a comment from White in the chat. White says, White says all Abrahamic religions were different attempts of world's domination. I think that's about vis-a-vis the two latter iterations, although Judaism does say all this stuff about, the Goyim will be our slaves, that's sort of after the Messiah comes. And in terms of functional, pragmatic action,
Judaism is
action.
successful in world domination.
No, see, that's the thing is, yeah, I feel like more. See, no, it's because the funny thing is the Hebrew people have been successful, or the descendants of the Hebrew people have been successful in world domination, at least through soft power, one could argue. But I think that the thing about, I'll proudly admit it. I mean, not sure about proudly, because I don't exactly like the context or what we're doing with the power. Nor do I think that such a small group of people should have that much power. Like, some Jews will be, from a super theological perspective, will be like, oh, it's interesting. I've had this conversation with this guy, reactionary Jew, but that's a different topic. But basically, these, what was I saying? Judaism and world domination. I think that it's not Judaism that has made Jews dominate the world. In fact, Judaism does have sort of prophecies for that, and there are things that could sort of lead in that direction, like idea that Jews are the chosen people and whatnot, and the sort of post-messianic fantasies. But at the same time, I feel as if Christianity and Islam truly are. Christianity is a proselytizing religion, and Islam is almost like an imperial conquering and governing religion. So it's like, it just seems like, I feel like Judaism, at least, even if the Hebrew people have somewhat come to dominate the world, I think the Jewish diaspora and a lot of sort of chance and other random factors, like secular factors, material factors possibly, but also perhaps one could even say like divine factors, like the Jews were punished to get to the position they were in now, or like I've heard different interpretations. Basically, the Jews are powerful now, but I don't think it's necessarily so much because of Judaism. That's, I think, one.
Yeah.
But No. I'm thinking that Judaism for world domination, that's very interesting because it's much more explicit that there's proselytism in Christianity, and Islam. I'll have to talk to a more religious Jew about this. Next time I go on the Luke Ford show or I talk to a reactionary Jew or anyone like that, I'll ask their opinion on it, or the next Orthodox Jew I talk to. But yeah, I'm curious to hear your take.
You could make the case that Catholicism was interested and still is interested in world domination. Well, under Pope Francis, I'm not sure, but I think you could make that. You could definitely make the case that Islam was interested in world domination. I think that's indisputable. But the Catholic Church, you could also make that point as well.
Or Christianity in general just seems fairly obvious because of the logical conclusion of sort of Christianity from the way I perceive it. From a theological perspective, it kind of has this imperial, inherently proselytic, universal quality to it that other religions.
The emphasis on conversion, yes, but I don't think us and even Orthodox Christianity, I don't think there's a unifying sort of domination idea of domination that the Catholic Church would have or Islam would have. Like Islam is a very much more is a religion much more integrated into political understandings, and it's the Quran is basically an instruction book. I don't want to misrepresent Islam. I'm not an Islamic scholar, but Islam and Christianity are very different religions in many ways.
I would say that arguably in some ways Islam is far more similar to Judaism than Christianity, but that's just my personal layman's interpretation, looking at certain theological things and even cultural things at face value. But I think that only makes sense. I'm curious to know what you think of the overall comment, though, about the idea that Abrahamic religions are all different attempts of world domination. I mean, that is a rather crude way of putting it, but it's an interesting statement if you actually look deep into it, It's sort of different. Yeah. Do you think... Yeah, I mean, obviously there's this sort of naive materialist kind of tone to it of like, oh, religions are just tools for social control, kind of like pseudo red pills, kind of like Marxist like materialist or sort of capitalist type, got it all figured out vibe to the way the question is phrased. But I'm not sure if that was even intentional in terms of what was it? The way that religions are like, oh, tools for social control, like they were invented. But I think that this kind of cynical take should somewhat, to some degree, be taken into account. And not just that, I think that most importantly, even if that isn't the intention, functionally speaking, if the religion is something that has an imperial or colonial spirit or a spirit of I think that these are interesting things that should be discussed. I mean, I see what he's saying with all of them, the least so with Judaism. I say Judaism is the most like a classical ethno-religion, Shintoism or Hinduism, or even like the Hellenic religions, as opposed to Judaism and Islam and Christianity, which I view as being universal, imperial, proselytizing, colonial, etc. in various ways. One softer, quote unquote, than the other, but you see what
Well, I mean, there's a simple practical explanation for why the three most well, not three. Well, Judaism hasn't been spread at all, really. Jews have moved around, but Judaism itself is not a conversion-based religion. But the reason why Islam and Christianity are so connected is because they had physical proximity to each other, and Islamic groups expanded into North Africa and the Middle East, and Christian groups expanded to Northern Europe and across the seas through their colonial empires. I think to say that was the plan from the beginning is, I mean, I don't think that's what the point the guy's making. But I don't really understand what he means by that. I mean, does he mean that it's sort of a Jewish plot to sort of take over the world? Yeah, I'm not sure what the guy means. I assume that's probably what he does mean. He's probably making a sort of a Semitic comment, but if you could clarify, that'd be good.
Yeah, feel free to clarify in the comment section quite, if you want a more in-depth response. let's see. So I think that Christianity, I don't know. I think that Christianity is different from, but I think that Islam has this quality as well. I think that certain facets, certain types of people are drawn to Islam and to Christianity. Like it speaks to and that's sort of a very perennialist way of looking at it. I know, but it's like different people, they're all drawn to God, but they have different ways in which, you know what I mean? Different ways in which, and I think that it's interesting the way that different Christianity, the way that I perceive it from an outsider, from a Jewish Middle Eastern perspective of a dude who knows very little about Christianity, the way that I see it is it seems to schism almost along perhaps ethnic lines or cultural lines. A lot of times, I'm very curious about, for instance, Protestantism, because I know about the ideas of ascetic Protestantism. I know about Quakerism, Baptism, Episcopalianism, Anglicanism. I know about the different branches of the Protestant Church in the Americas and whatnot from a very sort of academic angle. But this split off from this one at this time. But I'm curious, sort of what do you feel is kind of the driving force behind the changes within Christianity? And do you think that there's a continuation between ancient Greek and Roman thought and Christianity? Because I've heard some people say that. For instance, Spengler talks about the sort of Apollonian man-god concept, and how that is fused with kind of the Magian concept of the far-removed god, and this is really interesting. I mean, I don't know. These are just ideas that I'm throwing out there, but I think
it's good. No,
I'm really curious about the relation of different European populations to Christianity, Christendom as a whole. Sorry, go ahead.
I forget his name. There's a German scholar, I think Mark Citadel, wrote an article about him. Sorry. I forget his name, but he talks about how Lutheranism was a reflection of the German spirit. And that's why the Germans moved away from Catholicism. It's been ignoring the fact that a lot of Germans are still Catholic, particularly in the south, and Austria is effectively a German country. Although you can make the point, you could argue that they're just sort of Italians LARPing as Germans, but some would say that Northern Italians are Germans LARPing as Italians. So but yeah, I don't know if I'd agree with that point with I forget his name. Is a German scholar. He's a German sort of perennialist. Sorry. I think the reason why Protestantism came about was not just the printing press, but the fact that people felt confident enough to interpret the Bible by themselves without sort of a hierarchical clerical sort of interceding position. The idea that you could have a personal relationship with God without needing a church. And ultimately, that's what Protestantism is. If you get down to core Protestantism, it is anti-church in a way. Obviously, for practical concerns, most Protestants do.
At least in terms of capital C church, in terms of an establishment.
Yeah, capital C church.
Yeah. It's it's about the individual, sort of, right?
Which, I mean, has definitely posed problems for. The reason why liberal Christians think they are right is because they believe that they can interpret the Bible themselves, and the way they interpret it is endorsing homosexuality and all the other things, abortion, all those rights, all those sort of modern liberal pet peeves. And that's if you take the strict Protestant position, that might be a legitimate position from that perspective, and that does pose problems for Protestants. Although most Protestants wouldn't call themselves Protestants, particularly in the old days, they would just call themselves Christians. The idea that call yourself a Protestant. It almost seems like a more Catholic sort of name for heretics, like they're protesting against the Catholic Church. But there is the word Protestant does have precedent in among Protestants themselves. I won't argue that it's just purely a Catholic sort of pejorative. But as to why Protestantism came to existence in the first place, I've made the point before that the Catholic emphasis on Aristotelian rationalism during the Middle Ages sort of move away from faith towards reason, which is not a point that's stressed a lot. The move away from a sort of Platonic position of faith, or sort of almost Augustinian in general, but a more mystical understanding of Christianity towards a more rationalized, scholastic understanding of Christianity. The idea of transubstantiation being the idea that the substance of the Eucharist, the substance of the bread and wine, become the substance of those things become Christ. Obviously, Catholics believe that the blood and the body and the bread and wine in the Eucharist literally is the flesh and blood of Christ, whereas a Protestant would not believe that. Some would, but some would say the doctrine of transubstantiation is sort of an innovation of the Catholic Church, and it's not biblical at all. But there's debate between them about how you should interpret the passage. I forget what the passage is. The passage where Christ essentially says that take this bread is me, or something. I'm not sure about the exact passage. I'm not a biblical expert, unlike other people. But you could argue that it's a move away from rationalism, or Catholic sort of Aristotelian rationalism, away from that towards a more exuberant emphasis on faith and almost irrationalism, which Luther talks about sometimes. Like he attacks reason entirely.
Interesting. Is that
which
sort of
doesn't
where
go well with the
Quakerism comes from,
Enlightenment.
in a way? Is that a way that Quakerism comes from, in a way? Because that's a point of incongruity between the Enlightenment and Protestantism, which are things that I usually tie together. Of course, this is my sort of Middle Eastern sort of dumb understanding, because I just see Northwest Europe. I see Northwest Europe and I see Northwest Europe, Protestantism, Enlightenment.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's not as simple as people make it out to be. Of course, Calvin was more sympathetic to reason than Luther was. Calvin coming after Luther, of course. Calvin sort of moving away from Catholicism quite early, whereas Luther was already had grown up knowing nothing else but Catholicism. So there's a difference there. But I think that you can't understand modern America, or you can't understand, not just America in general, you can't understand America in general without understanding why Protestantism came into existence. And I can't fully explain it right here, but it is something people should look at.
There are some responses to you in the chat, by the way. White responded to your comment, and there are a few other people who have messaged or aimed at you.
Oh yeah, This is my body. That's right. Yeah, this is my body is the exact.
Hello?
Yeah. Hello.
Sorry, were you reading the chat?
Yeah. European.
Yeah, go ahead. I didn't.
Yeah, European Advocate came up with the Bible verse talking about take this, all of you, and eat it. This is my body that has been given up for you. So the way Catholics have tried to, because in the Middle Ages, there were a lot of heresies about the Eucharist, and there was stories about, oh, if you dropped. Oh, there's a really interesting. There's a really interesting heresy in the Middle Ages called, I forget what exactly it was called. Someone might look it up for me, but there was people who came up with the idea that if you eat Christ, then you eventually must shit out Christ. You must excrete Christ eventually. If you're eating Christ, then logically you must excrete him, which was a heresy that existed in the Middle Ages. And I mean, you could understand where that heresy came from if that's the position of the church, that you're literally eating Christ.
So therefore they viewed it as moral to excrete Christ, or they didn't eat Christ because they viewed it as blasphemous to excrete Christ.
Well,
or they didn't defecate. Which one of the options did they choose?
I'm not sure.
Or sacrilegious, rather.
Well, it became a point of dispute in the sense that people thought, well, that can't be right. We can't be, excreting Christ. So the idea that this is literally Christ, this is literally the blood and body of Christ, can't be accurate. And then that sort of started the whole move towards Catholics trying to bring about a justification, which eventually became transubstantiation in the early 13th century.
Interesting. Okay, I didn't know all the history behind it. Transubstantiation is the current practice of the exchange of the wafer and the wine, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. But also there are a lot of
by a priest. It can only be performed by a priest, which Catholics.
So that's like a kind of hierarchical, establishment-dependent view.
Yeah, and Protestants would argue that you're essentially making Christianity a sort of pagan sacrifice. The idea that you're sort of you have a priest that can create God, can conjure up God before you, and you sort of mystical, sort of well, not mystical, but you've got this sort of rationalized explanation for sort of eating Christ. A lot of Protestants would sort of potentially argue that that's a sort of a pagan derivative that's not truly biblical.
By the way, you have some more comments in the chat room about this. I'm just not commenting, not because I'm not listening, but it's just because I'm just learning stuff. I'm just sort of taking it in. I don't really have much to say particularly on this transubstantiation. I'm just sort of, again, like an outside observer. So it's all quite interesting to me. For instance, I know that there have been a lot of heresies, but that particular heresy you mentioned earlier is amusing. But
I don't think it was widespread,
sense.
but
yeah.
It's an interesting one. It explains, it gives an insight into why the Catholic Church had to come up with a justification for, well, not just an explanation for the Eucharist and the way they interpreted the Eucharist. But
yeah,
even
that makes
Catholics,
sense.
even Protestants sort of interpret it quite differently. Some Protestants would say that it's symbolic. Some would say that some have the doctrine of co-substantiation, that it's both the substance of Christ, but also the substance of the bread has remained. I forget what the other one is. I know that Anglicans, in the 39 Articles of the Anglican Church, they explicitly rejected transubstantiation, but many Anglicans still held to the belief that there was a literal presence of Christ in the blood and bread and wine in the Eucharist.
Yeah. Yeah, this was actually a large point of dispute at one point, wasn't it? Wait.
Well, in the House of Commons, to actually get inducted into the House of Commons, you had to declare that you did not believe in transubstantiation.
Interesting.
That was how.
I didn't know that. I mean, that makes sense. Once upon a time, how recently was this, though? I'm curious.
But they got rid of it in the early 19th century. It's when the Catholics were emancipated.
Probably prior to Benjamin Disraeli's time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's some comments in the side chat that you should probably take a look at. Brother Enabling says Google says it's called Stercoranism.
Yeah, that's
is
correct.
The name of this. Yeah. And then let's see. There's a bit of a conversation going on between White and another 90 days to change this, vis-a-vis quote unquote Europeans needing a return to their old faiths and not worshipping a foreign god. And the fact that and by the way, White also says that yes, indeed, he is implying that the religions are foreign and Afro-Asiatic. The what's it called? The West Asian originating Christianity and Islam. So and then he's having the other guy says worship the pagan gods with the parentheses around them. So what are your thoughts on this particular issue? Because I see comment sections full of this debate literally everywhere, sometimes on even non-political things that shouldn't even have to do with this. This debate is really seeping everywhere, and it's interesting. I think that I'd like to have perhaps even a discussion on my channel or something like that, perhaps even a bit Bloodsportsy if we want to have some fun. But I think that it's an interesting discussion, and I think that what's going on in the side chat right now perfectly encapsulate almost an identical interaction to what I see in almost every comment section or chat box very, very, very frequently on all sectors of the internet. What are your thoughts?
Seems to be the conversation among dissident writers at the moment, whether Christians can really ally themselves with La pagans. I call them La pagans because they're mostly not really pagans. They're just sort of atheists pretending to be pagans. Paganism wasn't a religion in the sense that Christianity was a religion. There wasn't a doctrine. There wasn't a church. There wasn't a... Paganism didn't have a moral code. The idea that morality and religion are unified is a Christian or Abrahamic, if you want to say, an Abrahamic, or Abrahamic, if you want to say it in the proper way. That was an Abrahamic position. So I wonder what people mean, what La pagans mean when they say that they're pagan. What are you talking about? When you saying being a pagan was more than just saying praise Odin in a comment section. So you know what is paganism to these people?
All right, so White, you're being asked what is paganism to you, and you're being called a larpagan and accused of atheism. Let's see. So I'm just going to read a bit of the side chat. Paganism's rites and traditions were only claimed as satanic by a foreign subversive force trying to gain as more like colonial force rather than subversive, or an imperial force, I would say. But that's soft versus hard power. But I guess it's subversive, sure. Trying to gain as much power as they could in Europe. I guess Christianity also did use subversion at various points in time. It depends, because Christianity wasn't always a majority religion. But I don't know. It depends. You're better equipped to address these things than me. Perhaps I'm wrong.
But I don't know what he means by paganism's rights or paganism's traditions.
Paganism's traditions, yeah. That is a good question, because paganism was simply a term used as a term to mean an aggregate of various indigenous religions of all the Europeans. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it could even be applied to Hinduism today. It could be applied to Buddhism in a way. it could really be applied to a lot of things, not just ancient European religion. But the key point really is ethics. Like, what if you believe in, like, when you talk about pagan ethics, what you're really talking about is philosophical ethics that were only ever really taken seriously by the Christians anyway. People like Plato's ethics, Aristotle's ethics, they weren't pagan doctrine. They were philosophical doctrine that were brought about by sort of dialectic, and they were considered by Christians, and they were pondered by Christian philosophers. In some ways, the New Testament, which was written in Greek, was influenced by that prevailing Greek philosophical atmosphere, and the terms used in the Bible and in the New Testament were influenced by the Greek philosophical traditions of the time. They weren't.
Yeah, this is.
Pagan.
I can very much see this. And also, you could even say that they're sort of like spiritual currents that run through all of Europe, or at least all of Mediterranean Europe, with this sort of quote unquote what Spengler describes as a quote unquote Apollonian sort of man god image. Which, although there are portrayals of men, I guess man gods as it were, in let's say West Asia, Magian quote civilization, they're portrayed differently in their relation and to the world, and there's a different conception of the role of what a true like supreme deity or deities should play, sort of, I guess, as it were. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, consider John chapter 1 verse 1, which is, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and God was the Word, which in Greek is NRK in ho, logos. Logos being a meme word that was used in sort of the Adam Wallace sort of
Jews have no logos.
Yeah. Logos. Logos is logos as a term was a term that when modern Greek scholars, Greek sort of classical Greek scholars would translate logos as word, because of the translation of that Greek word into the word in the Bible. Historically, though, the word logos meant a variety of things. The first philosophical use of the word logos was Heraclitus, when he talked about his understanding of reality of the world being in flux as being in accordance with logos. Now, did he mean the word? Did he mean the account? What the point I'm trying to make is that the Greek philosophical tradition was infused into the language of the Bible, and it was not a pagan tradition. It wasn't a sort of the idea that you have Christian philosophers and you have pagan philosophers. Doesn't really make sense. You just have really the pre-Christian philosophers and post-Christian philosophers. The idea that paganism and there was a pagan philosophy, I don't think it makes sense, because paganism wasn't about belief as such. Paganism was more about practice. And, pagans had a degree of superstition. And superstitio, the Latin word, as a negative connotation, but they did sincerely believe that you could watch the way the birds flew in the sky. Certain would indicate real things about the world. And then you could barter with the gods, that you could say, okay, I'll do this if you do this for me.
That's
and
interesting.
It wasn't about, oh, please, I submit myself to you, God, or something. If you're in a desperate situation, submit yourself to a god.
It's the idea of the distance of God, of the distance between God and man. It's a far removed God, which is what Spengler described as a more Magian conception.
Oh yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. By the way, there are some questions or comments in the chat. If you want to go over them. First of all, Brother Enabling says, I'm trying to remember that Jewish writer who framed the pagan naturalism as beautiful and Jews as performing a, quote, clean sweep on European culture. Do you remember who this is? No, no one has the name in the chat, though. Professor Farnsworth says that Christianity pitted the pagans against each other because it was so easy. Polytheists can't unify with each other because of their because of all their different gods. And then he says, channeling E. Michael Jones here. And then Rex Nemorensis said, John used logos in the Old Testament sense of the wisdom traditional. In the Old Testament sense of the wisdom tradition, capital W wisdom, not in Heraclitus' sense.
Yes, but the fact is that the Old Testament was not written in Greek, so they didn't have the word logos. So the point I'm trying to make is that language, the use of Greek in itself, is what the use of Greek itself, makes the Greek philosophical tradition, and the Greek philosophical tradition was really very integral to the Greek language. Makes Greek philosophical terms inseparable from the Bible, from the New Testament, because it was written in Greek, or Koine Greek, which is basically very similar to classical Attic Greek. So I'm not sure what point you're trying to make, Rex. Yeah, quite reincarnation was not a pagan thing, really. I'm not. That's sort of brought up a lot. There's very little evidence that ancient European pagans believed in reincarnation.
Just real quick, I'd like to respond to what Professor Farnsworth says vis-a-vis Christianity pitted the pagans against each other because it was so easy. Polytheists can't unify with each other because of all their different gods.
Well, they try, actually.
In some instances, that's true. Yeah, in some instances, that's true. But in some instances, that isn't. In fact, Judaism, whilst being an ethno-religion, first of all, often not all quote-unquote pagan religions of the world or indigenous ethno-religions of the world, most quote paganisms, as it were, are polytheistic, but not all of them are. And in fact, Judaism is unique in the sense that not only is it a monotheistic ethno-religion, which could even be described as a paganism in that sense, but it's different in the sense that it denies the existence of all other deities. Whereas, let's say, in some city-states in the Mediterranean, all around the region, you would have like this city-state or this polity or this tribe, this group of people, this ethnic group has their deity, and then the next ethnic group has their deity or their deities, and those are their patron deities, and they coexist. Like there is room for multiple deities and multiple traditions. It's sort of in the same way Judaism is kind of Judaism believes in one God that has sort of like, in some could say even like slightly pantheistic qualities and properties depending on the interpretation, and you can see like a semi-perennialism there, and from like that and like some of the Noahide views. But generally Judaism is unique in the sense that it is an indigenous ethno-religion, a quote paganism that doesn't allow for banding together as easily with its other religion. And in that sense, I think that there were instances, let's say, for instance, when pagans were getting persecuted in Lithuania, I believe, or in the sort of Baltic region, pagan tribes did band up with one another in the face of a common enemy, if I'm not mistaken. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that you had the example of Alexandria, which was really a polyglot city. I mean, it was a Greek city, really. It was a Greek city, but it was in Egypt, so obviously you had Egyptians living in it, and it was an interesting sort of fusion between sort of Greek polytheism and Egyptian polytheism. You know, the king, that the Ptolemies would sort of depict themselves as pharaohs adhering to the Egyptian gods, but they'd also, of course, be worshipping they'd sort of mix it with the Greek gods. I forget what the patron god of Alexandria was, but someone could probably tell me that. But I'll just make another point about the division between pagans. It was also the other way around, that you could argue that pagans also understood the division between Christians. One example being when the Emperor Julian came to power in 360 or 361. His predecessor, Constantius II, who was a son of Constantine, was an Arian believing that Christ, Arianism was sort of a heresy, basically, a non-Trinitarian heresy. Basically, he understood that the Orthodox Christians, or the Trinitarian Nicene Christians, didn't like the Arians. So he tried to, when he returned to Constantinople, he managed to gain the support, even though I forgot to mention Julian was a pagan emperor. He was the last pagan emperor. He managed to get the support of the Orthodox Christians in removing the Arian Christians from Constantinople. So it wasn't as one-sided as people think. There was a sort of degree of Christian division that some pagans did understand. And on the other side of that, Julian did try to conceive of a unified paganism known as Hellenism, or Hellenismos, which tried to infuse sort of Neoplatonic theistic monotheism or panentheism with sort of traditional pagan sacrifice. It didn't catch on naturally, well, mainly because Julian died about 3 years into his reign and was succeeded by another Christian emperor. But, you know, there was a degree of interplay between paganism and Christianity that people don't properly understand. But the original question was about Christianity dividing, easily conquering because paganism was divided. That was true to an extent, yes. But I think it was more about Christianity being a stronger force and this paganism being a weaker sort of system, if you could even describe it as a system. In a way, Christianity filled a gap that paganism didn't fill.
Do you think what would Europe look like if it had remained pagan?
I'm not sure. That's a difficult question.
It's a big hypothetical. Just let that sit in your brain. The people in the chat. Hold on. Let's see. Someone says Ryan Reeves has a few great topics on the subject in YouTube. Someone says Sticks for God of Vermont. And then someone says Sticks has pulled out. He's pulled out in the race for God of Vermont. Let's see. Serapis, or he'd be a demigod. Yeah, he's a good patron god of Vermont. But who's Serapis? Is Serapis someone you were talking about at some point in the chat?
Sorry?
And someone also said that Serapis, whoever Serapis is.
Oh, yes, that was a sort of a manufactured pagan god in Alexandria.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, the chat is very useful.
Like a synthesis god.
Yeah, this is why I love I love my viewer base, is because I have people who are like literally anything that one of us doesn't know in the chat, that one of us doesn't know in the conversation we're having, or doesn't have the name directly at hand, someone's gonna like get it for us. It's like I have a fairly high IQ viewership. So I found you. Sorry, go. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Anything.
No, we were just going over comments in the thing. I don't have any.
I can't really get the comments right now. Can you just read them out?
Yeah, totally. White says, "Bro, I'll join for sure when I get a new one." Yeah, totally. I'd love to have you on my channel. Come talk about paganism. Come talk to some Christ Bowl Christians. That would be very interesting. I'm trying to organize a conversation. Christians, specifically Christ Bowl, versus pagans, specifically like nationalists.
The thing is, I don't know if that'll be productive at all, because I think the pagan position.
No, I'm not. I'm trying to amuse, not necessarily be productive, but I do think it is a relevant conversation.
It's relevant,
I see. Okay, but tell me why you think it wouldn't be. Why you think it wouldn't be productive.
I think the pagan position comes down to Christianity is foreign, therefore it's bad, because their first maxim is their sort of white nationalism, or their sort of ethnic nationalism. That's the reason they're opposing Christianity. And yeah, the idea that Christianity created Marxism and liberalism and everything awful about sort of modern civilization. But I think that's a secondary point. The main point is that it's a Jewish religion. It preaches weakness rather than sort of strength. That sort of Nietzschean perspective. Well, not Nietzschean, but sort of it's a pretty common view that Christianity is a weak religion, that like a cuck religion, whereas other paganism and sort of secular sort of National Socialism, Nietzscheanism, emphasizes strength, which is what we need to save the white race and whatever.
What do you think of? I don't know. What do you think of people who have that approach?
Christianity or not? Which none of that has anything to do with the truth behind Christianity. It's just about the sort of Christianity has this attribute, therefore it's bad or it's wrong. It's not about whether the Christianity at its core is correct or not.
From my perspective, as an outsider to Christianity, it's always seemed that Christianity was basically, in a lot of ways, almost the European religion, as it were, specifically because there were a lot of Jews who announced themselves as some sort of messianic figure. And there were a lot of Jews who had sort of small cult-like followings around them. But at the same, especially around Roman-occupied Judea. But at the same time, why did something about the practices, the teachings of Jesus, of Yeshua, appealed to the nature of Europeans? Or at least some coincidences, some chances led to that being the case. But I think Christianity has always appealed to Europeans because it didn't most of the spreading of Christianity was not necessarily bloody and violent within Europe. At least if you compare the spreading of Christianity within Europe to the rest of the world, at least from my understanding. I might be wrong about this though. Maybe it was bloody because there are some bloody battles. For instance, Charlemagne gassed 6 million pagans. He was there were some people who treated pagans. Yeah, I mean, I'm not yeah. I mean,
and the Catholic Church sort of killed a lot of people. A lot of Protestant denominations persecuted Catholics. I mean, the example of the Cathars in southern France during the 12th or 13th century. Cathars being sort of Gnostic sect.
Yeah.
They believed that the material world was evil. They were basically genocided by the Catholic Church, by Catholic crusaders. But the point about Europeans being or Christianity being a European religion. Well, if the proper Christian perspective is that Christianity is for everyone, there is neither Jew nor Greek, but all are one in Jesus Christ. That's pagans like to quote that. I forget Galatians something. I forget what the verse is. Pagans like to quote that as Christianity being a cuck sort of religion. But I mean, that's true. It's true in the sense that Christians do believe that everyone can be saved. It's that Christianity is not an ethnically exclusive religion. Does that pose problems for the idea that ethnicities and racial groups are irrelevant? It could, but in the sense that if you idolize, I don't think Christianity supports race idolization. If you consider race to be the most important thing, then Christianity would condemn you. But the idea that Christianity doesn't support, or that Christianity supposes the idea of nations existing, I don't think that's biblical. I think that to argue that Christianity has caused the dissolution of nations isn't historically literate. I think the idea, the modern globalist sort of movement, I think was in conjunction with a rejection of Christianity more than anything else.
Interesting. Huh. I haven't heard that perspective before, but I can see where you're coming from, I think. There's a comment that, sorry, go ahead.
Someone like Jack or Imperial Aspirations, you probably talked to him before. He is an expert.
Of course.
On all this. I think, I'm probably sort of blundering a bit, but he's an expert. A Christ Bowl, just go to Christ Bowl Twitter and you'll get all the answers you need.
Yeah. It says Nietzsche's critiques probably apply more to sentimental LARPaganism than Christ Bowl, says Rex Nemerensis. Someone says, White says, I ask you this question. Would you consider Islam to be a part of, quote, European culture if we were converted to that instead? And I say to that, that is a very, I guess, kind of sociological view of history. It's like, if we were converted to that instead, if Europeans were these passive things that were just sort of acted upon and socialized in this way, no, I think that you have to take into account that the soul, the way that I interpret it is something about the soul of Europeans kind of yearned for something about Christianity, or you could just say something about some certain aspects of Christianity meshed with some certain aspects of how Europeans are, whether these things are caused by spiritual, evolutionary, cultural, chance or random factors, or even economic or factors. I think that you have to take all these things into account before, to realize that Christianity is a, quote, European religion in the sense of its unique sort of history of synthesis with Europe. I don't care either way. I have no particular investment in Europeans being Christian or not Christian, as a Jew. In fact, them being Christian is probably not less to my favor than them not being Christian, because there's Jews are kind of have this unique spot in Christianity that puts them in a difficult situation. But I think that for what Professor Farnsworth says later is also part of an answer to my question as a response to White is for whatever reason Christianity spread through the Roman Empire like a raging forest fire. And I also think that Christianity is particularly popular with European elites. Yeah, some might take a very cynical approach and say, oh, this is just because they wanted power, they wanted to be part of something new and powerful and wealthy and associated with the Roman Empire and whatnot, and they use Christianity as a means of civilizational power and control and waging war and organizing groups under a common banner, Christendom. But at the same time, I think that there are some non-cynical approaches and justifications for why Christianity could be something that is authentically European in some capacities, or at least European Christianity or Christendom, because Christendom is a thing and was a thing for the longest time. Christianity was the main way by which Europeans identified effectively with each other as Europeans by proxy or de facto. So it's very interesting and nuanced. I don't know. These are just some points to consider. I'm just sort of arguing devil's advocate, but because I have no particular.
Yeah, just looking at the comments. Spengler said that Julian was a proto-Muhammad. That's interesting. I might follow that up. But what else are people saying?
Hello?
Yeah, there you go.
Sorry, it just cut out. Sorry, keep talking.
The Cathars deserved it. Well, I'm guessing you're a Catholic, Professor Farnsworth, because I'm sorry, but I don't think genociding people as a Christian is morally correct in the Christian worldview.
European Advocate makes an interesting comment about nationalists. The hardest thing for nationalists to reconcile is the globalist multiculturalism nature of the leadership of the churches. And I assume that this is true in the sense that most nationalists tend to have sort of a traditionalist bent to them, and in the sense that you're talking about European nationalists. But yeah, with those premises granted, I would agree. I think this would seem to be a problem. What are your thoughts on this, Octavian? Specifically as a Protestant.
Sorry, what did he say about nationalism?
The hardest thing for nationalists to reconcile is the globalist multicultural nature of the leadership of the churches. And then it says in Genesis that, sorry, go ahead.
Well, that depends what you mean by churches. I mean, the Catholic Church is a unified body with one leader who, according to the 19th century canon law, is infallible. I guess that would pose problems for nationalism, which is largely why nationalism arguably did occur in opposition to the Catholic Church. But when it comes to Protestant denominations or Orthodox denominations, nationalism becomes a bit easier. I mean, the Anglican Church is nominally a unified church in communion with each other, but the Anglican Church in England, or the Church of England, has no jurisdiction over the Anglican Church in Australia, the Anglican Church in Africa, North America, being the Episcopal Church, or in the United States at least. So there's no real unified political body. But I see what you mean when you say that the universality of Christianity makes nationalism difficult. I guess the point is that Christianity definitely would endorse peace for mankind. So in that sense, the brotherhood of mankind through Christ is definitely a goal. Is it utopian? Probably. But the globalist view that you force humanity into a sort of a unified nondescript consumerist chaotic
modular replaceable individual consumer unit.
Yeah, an atomized unity. I don't think that's biblical. I don't think that's Christian. I can't see how that. I can see you could probably say that's a derivative of a Christian heresy. Many say liberalism is a Christian heresy. They're probably correct in that sense, but as a Protestant, I'm averse to the use of the word heresy, obviously. So yeah, I can see why nationalism, aggressive nationalism at least, would be considered contrary to Christianity.
There are a few more comments in the chat. Do you want to respond to any of them before I go ahead?
Just let me have a look.
While you do that,
I'm just looking back a bit.
Yeah. While you look back, I just want to quickly respond. Rex Nemorensis, it says in Genesis, the sons of Japheth will dwell in the tents of Shem. And this is something that, and Rex Nemorensis says that Acts calls Paul a tent maker. So this is interesting because it shows tents of Shem. Paul is a tent maker. Paul used to be Saul of Tarsus. So he was a Jew who changed his name from Saul to Paul. I'm not sure the significance of Paul being there, but I know that Shem is the tents of Shem. I've heard people use that in fact, I've heard another Jew, who some might know, reactionary Jew, was actually, we were discussing this particular passage. We were reading this passage together as part of him teaching me Torah. We were analyzing Torah with me, and one of the interpretations that both he and I seem to make some sense out of this is sorry, that was poorly formulated sentence, but it was the European colonialism of the Levant and West Asia that has basically continually gone on ever since Greek and Roman times, continuing all the way to Sykes-Picot and the Balfour Declaration and all those sort of like colonial sort of last touches that Europeans made in the Levant before leaving the Arabs and Jews to their own devices. So I just think that's that's sort of an interesting prediction, as it were, if you look at it like that.
Yeah, I mean, you could make that case that the Ottoman period was a European colonial enterprise.
Oh, well, that's its own discussion. I was thinking the Ottoman period was sort of a welcome break from that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the European colonial period was the Crusades, the initial Roman and Greek conquest, as well as the modern post-Ottoman British French Imperium. Are the Europeans dwelling in the tents of Shem? But anyway, if there are any comments further back that you'd like to respond to, by all means, go ahead.
What was the comment? No,
I was just saying if there were any comments that you wanted to respond to.
I'd say the Protestants are affected by this mindset as well. I just look at all those pos churches with feminism, lesbian ministers, Orthodox less so. I guess the thing about that is that Protestants don't have a unified sort of structure. So evangelicals in the South can escape the decisions of the Episcopal Church in North America, in the United States. But Pope Francis, whatever he says, if he said tomorrow that hell doesn't exist, you could arguably say that becomes Catholic doctrine if the Pope is infallible. I'm not sure about the details of Catholic canon law.
Pope's infallibility is something that always boggles my mind. And there's something that I view it as being very similar to, which is the way in which Jews not just value the oral law in the Talmud, but specifically value rabbinical teachings and decrees and laws, as they value that as being just as authentic, or as some would even say more authentic, because one is the interpretation and one is the source, which ought not to be interpreted by anyone other than an expert. They value these decrees more than the Torah or the Tanakh itself often, or they view the decree as the most legitimate way of approaching it. And it's interesting because there will be these, and yes, not all rabbis agree, and there are different technical traditions, but there's a lot of agreement. And what I find interesting is when there is something that's viewed as the establishment, but the establishment is constantly changing, and the sensibilities of the establishment are changing, the laws and policies of the establishment are being amended continually and whatnot. I think that it's difficult because then you have the reverence and the system built around something that's supposed to be traditional, which is usually supposed to be somewhat fixed in its nature. And then you have the fact that it's being constantly amended, or it's subject to change because it's based upon, one could argue, semi-fallible, because all humans are humans. Like, let's say, a rabbi, or, Chachamim, sages, basically, Jewish sages, or likewise.
Could you just move your mouth close to the mic?
Sorry. Yeah, Jewish sages. Is this better?
Yes, a bit better.
Yeah, Jewish sages, or likewise, the Catholic establishment, whoever makes the Pope, whoever makes policies for Catholics.
Yeah, I still can't quite hear you. Can you just
Is this better?
That's better. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. The people who make policies within the Catholic establishment or within the Jewish establishment, the thing is, the establishment, even though it has the reverence that one would have towards an establishment that's been established in ancient times, and that makes sense, the establishment is constantly changing, and new fallible humans are constantly coming and going and making policies, I guess, as it were. I mean, this is the problem. I guess is you can't have it both ways to some degree, is how I see it. That's why I think orthodoxy, as well as Karaism, which some view as a heresy and some think is complete bogus, like something that isn't actually descended from, let's say, either the Essayim or whoever it claims to be descended from. That's its own topic. But I think that, over-dependence on, rabbinic decrees and stuff like that, and the Talmudic sort of oral interpretations, as I see it, I think that is kind of akin to this Catholicism, like, idea of the Catholic establishment and papal infallibility, to some degree, less extreme.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. How does papal infallibility work in this? Like, how do you reconcile the sort of traditional qualities and the? You see what I mean? How do you reconcile the fact that there's supposed to be this traditional ancient establishment, and the fact that it can constantly change in its values, effectively, in a lot of ways?
Well, that's a complexity of Catholicism that I can't really get into. It's Catholicism is very legalistic, so I can't really tell you. But the Pope wasn't always infallible. That's all I can say. The papal infallibility is quite a new phenomenon, and that's really explicit papal infallibility is quite a new phenomenon. But I mean, that's the papacy. The primacy of the papacy is what really puts off a lot of Catholics as well as Orthodox people, in that sense that it almost seems like Catholicism is more a religion about the Pope than it is about Jesus, and that Jesus is just like a secondary thing.
That's why papist is an insult for Catholics.
That's why papist is the word, because people just hear Catholics go on and on about the Pope, and very little about Christ, which is definitely not a attribute of all Catholics, probably even most Catholics. But it one of the reasons why there's a lot of criticism of Catholics by Protestants and Catholics, Protestants and Orthodox.
Yeah, and I mean that makes sense. You can see where White has some comments in the chat. Those
I'll just
being,
check them out.
well, first of all, European Advocate says, I'd say the Protestants are affected by this mindset as well. Well, we read that already. European Advocate says, true, that is a huge problem.
So you a seat of a Kansas European Advocate?
True, that is a huge problem. I think you would argue that the current Pope is not the actual Pope, he's a heretic. Yeah, that's sedevacantism, exactly.
Yeah.
And then White says, every Christian holiday falls on ancient earth-centered pagan festival. On an ancient earth-centered pagan festival. Christmas.
Yeah, I agree. That's why we should ban
So,
Christmas and ban. Well, those points are true, and the idea that we still celebrate European pagan celebrations. However, those celebrations had practical purposes as well. They weren't just arbitrary. They occurred at the end of harvest seasons, particularly in Northern Europe, or just Europe in general. So you'd have a celebration for the harvest, and that could easily be incorporated into Christianity. Catholicism was a very long, slow growth. Sort of early Christianity was a very long process of development. But I mean, Easter has very little to do with the whatever pagan festival that existed before that. It's explicitly about the Christian, the incarnation, and the crucifixion and the resurrection, and the atonement of humanity's sins upon the cross. Christmas, Christmas is a bit more difficult. I mean, I'm critical of Christmas altogether nowadays because it's become just a consumerist sort of mess, and it's not about family anymore. So maybe, Halloween's obviously pagan. Christmas did have pagan origins. Well, Saturnalia and Yuletide definitely did have pagan origins. Christmas. That's why Oliver Cromwell was correct to ban it. But I'm only half saying that. I'm only saying that half ironically, or half unironically.
What church do you belong to?
If I had to say, I'd just say the Anglican Church, but not because I'm particularly theologically Anglican.
What?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of traditions within Anglicanism, and there's the Calvinist tradition in Anglicanism, which I probably adhere to. I'm probably closest to that tradition. Although I'm not entirely Calvinist, really. I mean, I'm a bit iffy about predestination. I don't know if I agree with the Calvinist doctrine of predestination entirely.
Yeah, that's another thing that I read about when I was reading Weber, when he was writing about Protestantism. I find very interesting. Is Calvinism the only branch of Christianity with predestination or predetermination?
Oh no, you have Catholicism has a version of predestination. Lutheranism has a version of predestination. Pretty much all Christianity has a degree of implicit predestination, except there's a sect that emerged out of Calvinist Netherlands called Arminianism. And Arminianism was sort of a derivative of Pelagianism, Pelagianism being an ancient heresy which denied original sin. And Arminianism, named after the Dutch theologian Arminius, explicitly denied the sort of predestination doctrine of Calvinism, which is why in Anglicanism you have Arminian factions, and then you have Calvinist factions. But Arminianism didn't explicitly reject original sin, though. I think original sin stayed. But I think all Christian denominations have a degree of predestination. I think Calvinist just has the most strict and explicit doctrine. The idea that God selects certain people for salvation, or that God already predetermined who would be saved and who wouldn't be saved. Not, yeah. That is the elect. That's the term.
The elect. Yeah, I've heard that term before. It's interesting.
But it's something that I'm not that into.
Yeah.
I wouldn't consider myself an Arminian, though.
The appeal, personally. Sorry, go ahead.
I wouldn't consider myself an Arminian, though, and a strict Arminian, like denying any predestination at all. I think that God's grace does partake in salvation. I think there is a degree of foresight that God has when it comes to salvation, but it's not strictly in this. I don't think I agree with the strict Calvinist sense.
Yeah.
But I sympathize with it in a way. Maybe not on a rational level.
Interesting. What do you mean on a rational level?
Well, I mean, I sympathize with the Calvinist sort of sensibility, like the Stoic Calvinist sensibility of.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Of just sort of resignation to your fate.
Your
in a way.
fate. Yeah, I see what you mean. Like just sort of accepting it. Let's see. I mean, I agree. I can see how something like that is both powerful and kind of there's a nobility in that, and yeah, like you said, a stoicism there. But
yeah,
at the same time,
at the same time, yeah,
kind of bleak. Like
at the same time, yeah, I do believe in free will. I do believe that humans have the ability to change their course in life.
Yeah.
And redemption being a Christian doctrine, which I think a lot of trad-minded Christians, particularly Catholics, don't appreciate much. Don't appreciate enough. The idea that people can be redeemed of their sins is something that doesn't have a lot of credence among trad Christians anymore. I feel like they're too dismissive of people and too sort of condemning. Not that you shouldn't condemn sin, but to condemn people to sin forever.
Yeah, it's easy in the modern age to do.
Yeah. I feel like, we should be more understanding in that sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I won't comment because I'm not a Christian, but I think that yeah, I think I've noticed what you're describing there, and I mean, while I can't blame Christians for doing that, I agree that objectively, yeah, there is that sort of redemptive component of Christianity that's sort of central to the faith. Hold on one sec. Someone says Calvinism comes close to Nietzschean paganism. That's an interesting comment.
Sorry, what did he say?
Calvinism comes close to Nietzschean paganism at times.
That's an interesting point. I haven't thought of it that way.
Yeah. Prior to that, there's some comments like.
Although Nietzschean paganism, I don't think that's a correct way of looking at it. Nietzschean paganism.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Actually, no, I do see what you mean.
Someone said how they would go collect items from burial mounds on Halloween, and that doesn't mean we sacrifice a horse on Christmas. Someone said I should try to get Lue Yi, the Chinglican, on sometime. Yeah, he's welcome on anytime. and he was the original advocate of the Christ Ball gang. Yeah, I know. And then someone said predestination is unacceptable in Eastern Orthodoxy. The Eastern Orthodox are synergistic. And then
Well, no,
Eastern
Orthodoxy does have a degree of predestination. All Christianity has it.
Well, yeah, you know this better than me. Yeah, go ahead. Respond.
I'm not certain. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's the case.
Let's see. What do you think of Silence? It's someone asked, have you seen Silence? 'Tis good. I don't know. Is that a movie?
Yeah, it's a film about Catholic missionaries in Japan during the 17th century.
Oh, yeah. I do know about this. Haven't seen it though.
Remember, I got a bit confused when I saw the trailer for that film because it looked like the Catholic priests were wearing sort of Orthodox clothing. And that I found that a bit weird, but apparently they were Catholic.
Yeah. European advocate is correcting himself, or Rex Nemerensis is correcting himself, saying, I should have said, sorry, I'm just reading. I should have said monergism, as a response to his last comment. As a response to your response to his last comment, rather.
Sorry, what did he say?
As a response to the last comment about Calvinism comes close to Nietzschean paganism at times. Rex Nemesis corrects himself, saying, I should have said monarchism.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know what monergism is.
It's something Christian. Some belief in Christian theology. The belief that God works through the Holy Spirit to bring about the salvation of an individual through spiritual regeneration. Interesting.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's. I'm not sure if that's exactly contrary to a lot of Christian doctrine, but I'm not an expert in theology. I mean, I myself, I don't think theology is the way to go with Christianity. Christianity's got to be about humans and human sort of interaction. And to go on about theology, I think misses the point sometimes.
Hello?
Hey.
Yeah, I was saying Christianity seems very theologically dense in a lot of ways.
No, not that Christianity seems well, every sort of Christianity is theological. But I think people should approach it when it comes to talking about it. They should approach it in a more human way rather than talk about sort of vague abstractions and sort of vague. For your more intelligent, sort of intellectually minded people, yeah, you might want to go down that route. But I think you've got to treat it as a human thing, because of course Christ came down as a man. He's fully man and fully God. He came down, talked to people. He was a human being. He didn't write a philosophical, creed and then gave it to mankind.
A real human being. And a real hero.
A real human being.
And a real hero. Europeans are quasi-autistic, so we have to logically reason out Christianity to understand.
Yeah, it shows a degree
I agree,
of
European
that.
advocate. Europeans are autistic. They do have this stupid fucking logical way of thinking, and this does date back all the way back to like ancient Greek and other European philosophers. Like Middle Easterners never needed to autistically rationalize and justify everything. For instance, Jews, if you look at a lot of Talmudic processes, like the way, like sort of Talmudic arguing, like just Jewish argumentation and thought processes in general, oftentimes we have our minds made up already, and we're simply manipulating sort of the facts around after the fact to justify our pre-existing beliefs or to convince ourselves of something. So it's like Europeans. It's true. Europeans do have to do this weird mental processes of doing this logical convincing. I guess they have a high standard of skepticism.
I mean, but for me, Christianity, I came to Christianity through Plato, through reading Plato, through grasping a philosophical understanding of universals. You know, Plato's theories of forms, the idea that the material world reflects absolute facts about the universe, absolute forms. And that sort of thinking is what moved me, what prepared me for a Christian worldview. So yeah, there is an intellectual element. But you know, it can't be purely that.
I agree with you. To be a sort of transcendental or kind of intuitive, visceral quality, or at least I feel like.
Yeah. If you've read what's his name? Kierkegaard talks about a leap of faith that every individual has to make when it comes to Christianity, because of the degree of irrationalism that you have to cope with. So there is a I don't think you can reason your way into it. You have to sort of, you can philosophically change your thinking, but there is a point at which you have to take a leap of faith. And that's really you know, something else that you can't approach in a purely theological way.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
I mean, the Catholics officially do believe that you can come to Catholicism purely by reason. Some of the Catholic viewers may dispute that, but the Catholic Church themselves have said in catechisms and things like that Catholicism is an entirely rational position. So you know, that's a difference between some, you know, the Catholic understanding of Christianity and other understandings. I think what's his name? Kierkegaard was a Danish Christian, but he was very critical. He's still very critical of the Danish national church anyway, so he's more of an individualist Christian in a way.
Kierkegaard's an interesting figure for several reasons.
Yeah, I haven't delved that far into him, but he is quite interesting.
Someone in the chat says, logically reasoning to its furthest extent is the way you should behave. No? And I mean, I disagree with that, but I'd like to hear.
No, really, not really.
I mean, that's like what a computer does.
You can logically justify anything, really. You can, it's, I hate myself. Hating myself, killing myself would solve that. Therefore, I should kill myself. That's a logical syllogism. Well, a very crude one, but you could dispute the premises. Well, the premises are wrong. You gotta go back. You gotta establish the premises first. Why? Do you hate yourself? Why do you hate yourself? Or why should you kill yourself? You can go back and back and back. You can get to the logical justification of the universe. You can do the Cartesian thing where you sort of try and find a rational foundation for existence itself. You can do that, but you're not going to get anything once you get there. You're going to end up with nothing.
Yeah, I would largely agree with you. I mean, I have other reasons for rejecting pure logical reasoning behavior on that ground. But let's see. Someone says reason is sterile. I really dislike when trad Catholics call people fidelists. Fidelists? I'm not sure what that term would mean.
Fideists. So those who believe that faith and reason are sort of mutually exclusive in a way.
Interesting idea. European Advocate has a good comment if you'd like to read that. And Rex Nemerantha is saying reason alone will end in anti-natalism/suicide. I largely agree with you. I think that that's what we came to in the beginning of the call. If you're a materialist atheist or have a similar worldview, and you're going about things in a purely reasonable manner, and the moral axis that you prioritize is sort of care harm, which is the most natural, instinctive, logical one to prioritize, it seems, statistically speaking, for most humans, for whatever reason, I mean, it's fairly obvious reasons, but I can understand why there would be a small group of humans to evolve not to be like this. But regardless, I think that if you have all these premises, it is the logical, reasonable, rational thing to do, unless you're coming into it from a religious standpoint already. So I'm curious to hear what your take is. Yeah, anti-natalism is the logical conclusion in a lot of ways.
Well, it's a logical conclusion based on a few certain premises. That one being that there is no purpose to life, really. There's no meaning to life beyond pleasure. The other being there is no sort of existence beyond the material. And, you're not going to, I think 9 times out of 10, you're not going to end up at anti-natalism, but for certain people, that would be the logical conclusion. And for a lot of people, that would be the de facto sort of unconscious conclusion that that'll just come, that'll come by naturally, in the sense that they won't see any reason, they won't be compelled to have children at all, even if they don't believe technically that having children is immoral. They might just not have children anyway, because they don't see any reason to do so.
Yeah, I largely agree.
I don't have any fear of anti-natalism catching on.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't particularly fear that either. If you have any final thoughts, you can go ahead and speak.
Final thoughts.
I've been going on for a while now, and I've pretty much said all that I'm really interested in saying. Although I'm very interested in hearing you speak. I don't want to be
Yeah.
like wasting your time or anything like that.
Final
So if
thoughts.
you want to bring this to an end, you can go for it.
I mean, I was a libertarian.
Hello?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Hello? Hello? Oh, sorry. I just realized my mic. Sorry. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Oh, right, you're muted. Anyway, I mean, I started as a libertarian, moved on to sort of, you know, your sort of cringy white nationalism, then moved on to traditionalism. Then I moved on to, you know, traditional Christianity or whatever. The thing is, right, don't take all these sort of ideological sort of milieus and these sort of right, like these far right sort of perspectives too seriously. Just try and you know, eventually once you stay in a milieu for a certain amount of time, it seems like people get bored of saying the same thing over and over again, and then move on to greener pastures, some new sort of edgy belief because it's more interesting. So yeah, just be careful of that. Be careful of sort of everything being in most, you know, the contest of edginess. How edgy can you be? You know, oh, this isn't edgy enough for me. I've got to move on. And it's sort of an ironic element when it comes to that, but the sort of alt-right sort of reactosphere, sort of segments of the internet. Just, you know, think about things carefully. Don't sort of, you know, idolize edginess. That'd be my final point.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. Thank you again for coming on. Yeah, I think it's been a good chat. And there's just one last question that I want to hear your take on, which is RJ responds: do you believe logic touches at absolute truth? Not in the sense that through logic you may understand absolute truth in its entirety.
It approaches it, and it approaches simple things, but complex things, I'm not so sure. And it can approach sort of outlines of complex things like God. You can sort of reach God through a certain degree of logic, but you can't understand or properly. It's not enough. The Platonic view, you know, of the form, like the ultimate form being God, that helps. That helps in getting you there. And I think it's a good starting point, but it doesn't, it's not enough. It doesn't properly help you when it comes to religious belief, I don't think. But logic has its place. Logic is absolutely necessary. I've studied classical logical systems, predicate logic, or general predicate logic with identity. I've studied natural deduction, axiomatic logic. So yeah, logic is useful, but just be very careful of it. It's a practical tool. It's not something you should. It's not something you should idolize and sort of take as an absolute sort of rule of conduct. But I mean, but that's not to say you should be an irrationalist. And you can sort of joke around with that. I've joked around with sort of just there's the memory TV meme where the cleric, the Muslim cleric, says, "Ignore him, for he is a man of logic and should not be trusted." And that's just a funny meme that sort of trad type people like to spread around. But yeah, I'm rambling on a bit now. But yeah, logic does approach truth, but it's humans just aren't good enough to really. It's not enough. It's not enough.
Yeah, I would largely agree with you there. I mean, I have my own reasons why I come to my position, probably fairly different from yours, but yeah, I'd say yeah to any prospective listeners, I would give similar advice. Again, yeah, thanks a lot for joining me, and yeah, I think it's been a good first shot at whatever this is, and yeah, I'm looking forward to making more podcasts or sort of like content for bored people, and for bored myself and us in the future. Yeah, thanks again for joining us.
No worries.
Awesome.